A very good morning to you. It's 3 minutes after 10, and I hope you were listening yesterday, because we're going to be throwing back quite a lot to some of the conversation that we had, and of course some of the detail contained within Sir Martin Morbick's report. Do you know what? I never know what I'm going to do until the light comes on, and sometimes I'm still not entirely clear precisely how we're going to handle things, and long after the light has come on. But I think we'll take a moment to give some credit to Sir Martin Morbick. It's funny, the stuff that gets overlooked. He'd probably done more to reaffirm faith in public service, public duty, than every single Conservative cabinet minister since 2010. From where I'm sitting, at least, he has delivered on an extraordinary scale in the face of originally considerable scepticism. He has absolutely no agency over prosecutions, of course, or arrests. But in terms of the how far and how deep this inquiry went, I think Sir Martin Morbick deserves the gratitude of a nation, actually. I really do. I mean, how often do we find ourselves considering official inquiries inadequate or unfit for purpose, or grounds for cynicism, scepticism, cover-up, accusations of cover-up? Look, it took a long time, but compared to other miscarriages of justice or tragedies, avoidable tragedies, it was delivered. So thank you, actually, Sir Martin Morbick. We spend an awful lot of time, don't we, on this programme castigating public figures and pointing out inadequacies. Robert Jenrick, for example, a former housing minister, is currently the front runner. He came first in the first ballot of Conservative MPs, a man best known for ordering the painting over of murals at a processing centre for unaccompanied child refugees. Or perhaps he's best known for that, or perhaps it's for unlawfully helping a billionaire to secure planning permission for a massive housing project. I don't know what your best. Rory Stewart, Joey suggests, deserves a bit of credit. Yeah, all right, I'll take him out of that. But although, well, no, because I think Sir Martin Morbick has done more to uphold or to reaffirm faith in public duty than all of them combined. It doesn't mean that none of them did anything. So thank you, Sir Martin Morbick. Two thoughts, really, carried over from yesterday. Thomas just mentioned one of them in the headlines: incompetence, greed and dishonesty. Incompetence, greed and dishonesty. Extraordinary. And the other was Dave in Shepherd's Bush, who I know touched a lot of you with the clarity of his contribution as someone allied to the tower, someone who knew people in it, someone who was hearing an eyewitness account of what was happening before the news crews had arrived. And Dave said, what if he hadn't written it down? What if the Grenfell Action Group, Edward Duffan and Francis O'Connor, will be catching up with Edward at some point in the coming days, as and when it suits him. But what if it hadn't been written down? A portion of the inquiry report focused specifically on how the people trying to draw attention to the problems that contributed to, and in some ways caused, the tragedy were treated with contempt by the tenant management organisation, and secondly, the council in particular, at least one member of whom was put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. And that is part of what I'm trying to nibble at this morning, that sense of why you are or not surprised, what it tells us about the nature of Britain that we perhaps already knew. How many people associated with this tragedy have actually seen their fortunes rise or increase. One of the owners of one of the companies is photographed in the newspaper today outside his £3 million mansion. And you sort of think he doesn't seem to have suffered very much as a consequence of actions that the report suggests contributed to the tragedy. Some of the detail, of course, that emerged was almost unbelievable. Deliberately faking reports or faking tests to allow them to put stuff on a building that they knew could perhaps be unsafe. Baroness Hale is another example. You're absolutely right, Karen, of somebody who has perhaps contributed. And Lawrence reminds us Jacob Rees-Mogg is an example of someone who, he didn't contribute to the disaster, but he certainly compounded the misery and the agony of the bereaved by suggesting that everybody who died lacked common sense. Boris Johnson gave him a knighthood. It says something, doesn't it, about Britain, that? What does it say about Britain? A disaster caused by dishonesty and greed. 72 deaths. Every single one of them avoidable. So, how did they happen? They happened because engines of power and privilege were permitted to ride roughshod, not only over the concerns, but ultimately over the lives of ordinary people. Ordinary people. Some little phrases that spring to mind would include elfin safety, as one Daily Mail columnist used to describe attempts to keep fellow humans safe. Another one, lefty lawyers, is quite popular at the moment. In fact, I think Robert Jenrick is a keen exponent of that phrase. Lefty lawyers, the people actually charged with ensuring what laws we have to protect us from the engines of power and privilege are actually enacted, that we are, as humans, confident of having our rights, or human rights, upheld. The human rights of 72 people in North Kensington in June 2017 were categorically not upheld. They were horribly abused. And we've had 14 years of government, or at least 8 years of government, dedicated to the denigration of human rights, or even, in some cases, the disappearance. And the more you read into what happened, the more you read into the report, the more you realise that it is a direct consequence of culture and ideology that sees regulation or protection as the enemy. You could loosely describe it as a sort of Tufton Street-inspired mania, the idea that if you allow wealth to do whatever wealth wants, then the market will self-regulate. You don't need to impose rules on people because the market will essentially somehow organically create rules. Tony reminds me of another phrase. We should write these down, actually, shouldn't we? Elfin safety, lefty lawyers, bonfire of red tape. I found an article yesterday from before the tragedy describing David Cameron as celebrating his successful bonfire of red tape. Incredibly retrospectively unfortunate language, but goodness me, a bonfire of red. Well, what is red tape? Red tape is the kind of regulation that prevents companies from putting flammable cladding on the side of a building. Red tape is the kind of regulation that would see punishments in place for people who rented out properties or social housing organisations that presided over properties that were not fit for purpose, communal areas that were not safe. Red tape. And listen, today's not a day for criticising ordinary people who got caught up in the rhetoric, but how many times have you found yourself thinking that elfin safety, as Richard Littlejohn likes to call it, or red tape, as Jacob Rees-Mogg likes to call it, or lefty lawyers, as Robert Jenrick likes to call them, how many times have you found yourself caught up in that rhetoric and thinking that somehow these are things that you should be opposed to? It remains by far the single most fascinating and important element of politics in general and British politics in particular over the last 100 years. The ease with which decent, ordinary people are persuaded to act and ultimately vote against their own interests. What's next on the list? Oh, let's get rid of the European Convention of Human Rights. Let's be like Belarus and Russia and surrender even more of our hard-won rights and protections at the altar of power and privilege, because doff cap tug forelock, letting the powerful, letting the wealthy do whatever they want is somehow supposed to help the rest of us through a form of, if not trickle-down economics, then trickle-down decency. Well, I ain't seen much trickling down from this lot. And I hope their collars are felt sooner rather than later, although everybody seems to be relatively philosophical about the necessity of due process. Lucy Easthope, an emergency planner who's written a superb book called When the Dust Settles, and who spoke to me a little bit on the Full Disclosure podcast about Grenfell. She disagrees. She believes that the police inquiry could have unfolded either alongside the Martin Moore-Bick inquiry or independently of, and I don't know, she knows more about this stuff than I do, but the fact is that the Metropolitan Police appear determined to pursue culprits, some of whose names are now known and are on the public record. So this is a strange question, but it's a really important one. I want to know how surprised you are to learn that incompetence, dishonesty and greed practiced by wealthy business people and right-wing politicians and council employees on good scratches, on good whacks, but essentially being rewarded for diminishing the quality of service they provide to their clients. I want to know how surprised you are by what you've learned over the last 24 hours. And perhaps you haven't learned anything, in which case you won't be surprised. But I am shocked to my core, even though I knew most, if not all, of what was coming. But am I surprised? This is the country of Hillsborough. Margaret Thatcher's chief press advisor, Bernard Ingham, went to his grave a couple of years ago, still refusing to apologise for claiming that the Hillsborough tragedy had been caused by Liverpool football fans. The Sun newspaper carried a front page stating the truth, even though the editor was told by the journalist that wrote the article that that was an unconscionable and unjustifiable headline. Again, Rupert Murdoch, who, of course, was very much in bed with Margaret Thatcher's government, did nothing to punish the despicable human being responsible for that front page. So my surprise is mitigated by my knowledge of what's gone before. We've had a crash course recently in what happens when right-wing, maybe right-wing's not fair, actually, but when politicians and powerful business interests combine to ride roughshod over the rights and interests of ordinary people. We've had a crash course with the post office scandal. The detail of that, and remember, a lot of people think there was a racist element to that scandal as well, just as many of us believe there was a profoundly racist element to the Grenfell Tower tragedy. But the scale of the post office scandal, the attempts at cover-up, the knowledge of people at the top of the pyramid that what was happening was unconscionable, and the failure, were it not for a couple of journalists, to bring it into the light, which brings us back to Dave in Shepherd's Bush yesterday. He said, what if they hadn't written it down? They'd all sound mad if they'd been running around after the fire saying, I told you this was going to happen, I warned you, but they wrote it down. It's all there in black and white. So I don't want to ask a depressing question necessarily in terms of will we learn from this, or will we be sitting here in 10 years discussing another tragedy which gets filed under the headline, it must never be allowed to happen again, although I'm kind of interested in that. But what does this tragedy tell us about our country? What does this inquiry tell us about modern Britain? Or Britain, actually. It doesn't have to be modern at all. And that's why I want to know whether or not you're surprised, and if not, why not? And bring whatever you want to the party. It might be Windrush, it might be the infected blood scandal, it might be the post office scandal, it might be Hillsborough. But I think if you'd come to me 20 years ago and talked to me about the establishment conspiring with engines of power and influence to keep the British public in the dark, I'd have thought you were a little bit nuts. I think if you'd come to me 20 years ago to tell me that a tragedy like this displays a pattern of institutional behaviour, that institutions are dedicated to self-promotion and self-protection, and the rest of us are chaff, fodder, sometimes ammunition, I don't think I would have believed you. I had a little bit more faith in the notion of society than I have today, which is why I feel such a burning debt to Sir Martin Moore-Bick. Such a deep sense of gratitude to somebody stepping up. And you know, his brother was in the army as well, so they're obviously raised with a notion of public service, public duty that's profoundly lacking from many corners of our country today. So I think 20 years ago, if you'd said to me that all of these things essentially speak to the same fundamental truths about our country, the Bloody Sunday cover-up and the whitewash inquiry that followed, the infected blood scandal, the Hillsborough tragedy, the post office scandal. You can't see them. Even Orgreave, I think, gets included on this list, and there will be other stories as well. I don't think you can see them in isolation. I think you can see them as part of a pattern of power and privilege conspiring with engines of influence. Because remember, you kind of rely upon corrupt journalism to get away with some of this stuff. Margaret Thatcher's press secretary claiming to his grave that Hillsborough was the fault of Liverpool fans. You can't, and of course, editor at The Sun, disgraced former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, lying in the most despicable terms about dead children on the front page of the best-selling newspaper in the country. It doesn't happen because of one section of society. The politicians can't get away with it unless they've got journalists doing their bidding, and the journalists can't get away with it unless they've got politicians on their side. And neither of them can get away with it unless, in some cases, they've got the police singing from the same hideous hymn sheet as happened at Hillsborough, which is why the fact that 7 years feels like a very long time for Grenfell investigations to have been completed. But in fact, given the depth and the scale, the breadth of the information, evidence needed, I think they've done us all proud. I really do. I think they've done the country proud, and I think they've done the victims proud, although it's not for me to say that categorically. That's my belief. That's my opinion. You're welcome to disabuse me of it. But that's why I want to talk about surprise. I want to take off the rose-tinted spectacles that would have seen me call you a little bit nuts 20 years ago if you'd told me that this is the country that we live in, a country where ordinary people can be killed avoidably by the dishonesty, greed, and incompetence of powerful, privileged people, vested interests, and wealth. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And remember that if you were to open the Daily Telegraph today, I am 99% certain you'll be able to find an article claiming it's absolutely awful that people aren't proud of British history anymore. Well, here's some British history for you. Grenfell Tower, Hillsborough, Bloody Sunday, infected blood, post office sub-postmasters jailed for crimes they did not commit, while people above them in the chain of command, above them on the ladder of society, knew that injustices were unfolding. And that's just 5 off the top of my head. COVID contracts. Power, privilege, and wealth combined to treat the rest of us like scum, whose lives are dispensable. Doesn't sound so nuts anymore, does it? 10:23 is the time. 2 more thoughts before we turn to the phones, which I will do sooner rather than later, I promise. The first is, I think what I'm looking for today is your explanation of how the ecosystem in which Grenfell Tower could happen was created. So the different forces and tides that created the ecosystem in which it could happen, in which incompetence, greed and dishonesty on an epic and institutional scale, and practiced largely by engines of wealth and privilege and power, could kill 72 entirely innocent human beings and leave their families still reeling from the horror of it. What is it about our political and establishment ecosystem that creates the circumstances in which this could happen? That's the question I have for you. It's possibly ambitious, but I have absolute faith in your ability to provide a variety of answers to it. And the second is, apropos nothing in particular, except this sense of theme, this sense of pattern. Guess what happens at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? Module 8, preliminary hearings, children and young people. The latest chapter of the UK COVID-19 inquiry will get underway. Power, privilege, politicians, creating circumstances in which entirely innocent people's lives could be treated with contempt or as dispensable. I'd forgotten about that, and I literally just checked the dates now and couldn't quite believe that that chapter kicks off tomorrow. Rob's in New Cross. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I'll try and keep it simple. I'm Secretary-Treasurer, Secretary of our local Tenants Association now. It was a TMO. It was a housing cooperative before that, and I've been involved with this now for over 40 years. We're involved now in what I can only really describe as a sort of miniature wet Grenfell, because it's a failure. What we're experiencing is a failure of the of our mechanism of choosing materials based on the fact that our organisation is a prisoner to service charges.
It's a slight. I don't know if there's a slight echo on the line, Rob. So it's a suboptimal. It's a suboptimal technology. Don't worry. I mean, we'll stay with it for a little bit longer. So you're describing a prioritisation of profit. I think service charges is a scandal of a different order, but a prioritisation of profit over the most basic provisions of safety and quality.
I'm essentially talking about the fact that communities are split now between leaseholders and tenants, as they are in every estate in the country. And what that means is that leaseholders have to watch when work is being done on their estates. They have to count the pennies at the expense of.
But when did that? You've been there 40 years. When did that start to change? Because some people
with the right to buy.
Right.
I was at a conference when it was first announced, and there were all the big institutions there, London Housing, Shelter, all the rest of them. And they all essentially predicted the same sort of chaos and profit-driven madness that we're seeing now.
And this is back to Hayek, back to the economic theory that if you let them do whatever they want, the market will regulate itself.
Yes, but it's also social engineering.
Go on.
Because you're targeting communities and you're putting the proposition to them that, you can have a great future if you buy a house, but it means that you will be taking decisions that are contrary to the people who are not buying the houses.
I think it was James in Sidcup, possibly, or someone else yesterday described it as loser housing. There's creating this idea. And that is why, perhaps, even subconsciously, some of the people responsible for what happened in Grenfell were treating the people that lived there with contempt because of the social engineering that casts them as second-class citizens or third-class citizens.
It's not really about that sort of stigmatization. It's about the economic hard truths. And working people, were persuaded that this would be a good idea, and now they're driven 24/7 to pay their mortgages. Now, they can't be expected to read pages and pages of reports on... what we've got is not a fireproofing material problem. It's a waterproofing material problem.
This is in your properties, and this will create mould. And mould, in my opinion, is a ticking time bomb for the national health.
Exactly, and we've seen that now everywhere since a regeneration program 5 years ago to solve an existing problem.
Has made it worse.
And that has made the problem worse.
And I'm going to stop you there. I'm glad we stayed with it. The phone line was just about bearable for me. I hope it was for everybody else. But that phrase there, a regeneration problem that has made the situation worse. In this case, talking about the ingress of water, not fire. But it will be causing fungus. It will be causing mould, which is why the story of the Labour MP last week, who was letting out properties riddled with mould, was so, to me at least, so troubling, so upsetting, so scandalous. And that notion of right to buy being part of the problem here is the second or third time that point has been made. Also reported this week, of course, that the current government was considering the abolition of right to buy, stopping it altogether, which makes it rather convenient, doesn't it, that the Housing Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is up next on this programme. But first, here's Thomas Watts with your headlines. 10:33 is the time. A quick message from Kevin in Dublin. Listening to you talk about the list of recent scandals which have shown the disdain for British citizens that the British establishment can have makes me think that people in the UK may finally be seeing the establishment in the same way that people outside the UK see it. Kevin, I should add, is in Dublin. Perfidious Albion exists. The difference these days is that the empire is no more, so all of the scandal, tragedy and injustice is directed inwardly. onto your own people rather than inflicted on far-flung parts of the world where it can be ignored or swept under the carpet. Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Angela Rayner, joins me now. Angela, 58 recommendations by Sir Martin Moore-Bick. Can you tell us which ones you already know you will definitely be implementing?
Well, as you say, there was 58 recommendations yesterday, and just reading that report, James, it was absolutely horrifying to see that at every level, whether it was the regulators, the government, previous governments, the local authority, the manufacturers of the cladding, just every single element failed those people and led to the avoidable deaths of 72 people. And, you know, that if that isn't a moment to take stock and think how disgraceful it is that we got to that position, and as Sir Martin laid out, that actually profit and greed came above people's safety, then, you know, that is my number one focus when looking at these 58 recommendations, is to make further progress. And since I've been in the job, I've been appalled at how little progress has been made on the remediation. We've got 4,630 high-rise buildings that we're aware of that need remediation. 50% of them are in the process of it, 29% concluded, but that means that we've still got many, many more that people are living in those blocks at the moment and will rightly be feeling very anxious about that. And that's why my number one focus is really to do that, accelerate that work.
What would that acceleration look like? Because some of these people living in these properties have been phoning myself and my colleague Sheila Fogarty for years about their plight and their sense of abandonment. I mean, you're agreeing, I think, with their analysis
Absolutely.
of abandonment. So what will improvement look like to them directly and immediately?
Yeah, I mean, there has been changes to the law. There has been prosecutions and over 400 legal notices that have been, and processes have been set up to try and speed up this process, but it's far too slow. So one of the things I'm looking at now is how we can identify who are the owners of the building. Some of these are offshore shell accounts and, you know, subsidiaries, and really trying to get to the bottom of that and speed up. And if there's legislation that needs to be tightened up, you know, there is overlap on some of the regulators. We've got the new regulator that has got full powers from April this year, but really assessing where this is up to, and by this autumn to come forward with the accelerated plan, because I just think it is completely unacceptable 7 years on that we're in this situation.
There's a line on page 225, and I can't imagine many people have read all 1,700 pages yet, but it rather jumps out, a task that only the government can undertake. I mean, this is where the buck stops, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And, you know, the Prime Minister yesterday, when he made the statement to the House, you know, one of the frustrations, and I think this has been sort of picked up in some of the conversations you've been having, time and time again, we've had Prime Ministers stand up, whether it's Horizon, the infected blood, whether it's Hillsborough, and now with Grenfell, where absolute systemic failures and people apologising for it and then saying things must change, and then feeling like, well, when's the next thing coming? We've got to have a look at ourselves as a country and the checks and balances that are in place to make sure that people are empowered. And the one thing that stood out to me with what Sir Martin said was the way in which those tenants were treated. They were raising concerns even before the Grenfell disaster and completely ignored. They were, disempowered. And I've seen this with tenants. This is what we've spoke about, where people are fearful to raise concerns because they'll be evicted from their homes. Just the level of imbalance in the system at the moment, where people are not able to raise their concerns and have them listened to. And it wasn't just one area, it wasn't just the government, it was the regulators that were meant to keep people safe. It was the manufacturers of the product who were dishonest. As Sir Martin says, it's just beggars belief that throughout the whole system, people's voices were not heard and they were treated like second-class citizens. I mean, this is Kensington. This is one of the richest boroughs of our
Indeed, it was
country.
giving a £100 rebate to some residents not long before the tragedy happened, which we talked about at the time. But speaking about political will, Angela Rayner, why did so many of your parliamentary colleagues leave the chamber yesterday before the Prime Minister's statement on the inquiry?
Well, I don't know about, what was happening with other members of Parliament and what their commitments were, but I was there in the chamber, and we told parliamentarians before yesterday that obviously you've seen the report, it's quite weighty. Parliamentarians want to go off and read that report, and we're going to put parliamentary time forward to have a proper debate so that people can digest what's in the report. It's very hard, to be fair to members of Parliament, who over half of them are new members of Parliament, to get a report of that volume. And I'm sure they wanted to go and read the report, because that report came out and then the statement comes out, and without having the context and being able to have read any elements of it, it's really difficult for parliamentarians to raise issues if they've not even seen the report.
Okay, well, John McDonnell knows his way around Parliament, of course. He's described the tragedy as social murder. Is that a phrase you have sympathy with?
Well, I mean, anyone who reads the report will be absolutely horrified by what happened, and it's really laid bare. And Sir Martin says that all of those deaths were completely avoidable. And this is the point really that has been made about justice, because the families and those that lost loved ones have said that, the justice delayed is justice denied. And that's why it's important that the Met Police are given all of the resources they need to carry out their investigation.
And as you know, some families worried about the speed with which the wheels of justice will turn. If you're back here in 2 years' time, how likely do you think it is that anybody will have been jailed for their role in the Grenfell Tower tragedy?
Well, I think from the statements that the Met Police have made, they understand the urgency, but also the
So you think it's more likely than not that jail time will be involved?
I think the Met Police have to look at that, and they have to look at, I mean, it's pretty stark what is in that inquiry report. I have to be very careful, James, about what I say, because, as the Prime Minister set out yesterday, anything that could impact on that investigation, that would be the real scandal if that prevents justice. The Met Police will carry out their investigation. They know how important it is. They have been investigating over this period. They have been gathering evidence, and they will continue in light of the substantial information in the report by Sir Martin yesterday.
And as a consequence of that report, under more scrutiny, of course, than ever before. Just to return briefly to the detail and some of the language that you've used, what jumped out most at you? We're trying to map the difference on the programme this morning between surprise and shock. What genuinely shocked you the most about what you've read so far?
I was angry because it wasn't just one part of the system. It was every single bit of the system. That's what shocked me, and that's what made me really angry, was because it wasn't just one bit. There was systematic failures and disregard, and there were so many opportunities where something could have been done differently, and it wasn't. And in fact, reading the report, you can see how it was made worse. You look at the timeline from, they describe about government from the early 1990s around understanding of flammable cladding, and then up into the 2000s, and then even in 2016, the department that I now oversee, knowing full well the gravity and not the deregulation and lack of action. That to me is just, it's not reading that report, it's not just like, oh, I didn't know, or it wasn't my responsibility. It was a systematic disregard for responsibilities.
Well, and yet, of course, I didn't know, or it wasn't my responsibility, is precisely the defence that your colleague Jaz Athwal has offered up for exposing his tenants to arguably very exploitative and inarguably very unpleasant circumstances. In the shadow of Sir Martin Morbick's report, how can Jaz Athwal in Ilford South still have the whip in your Labour Party?
Well, I mean, the whipping situation is not something that I have, it's not something that I have control over.
You can have an opinion.
But my opinion is, and I've been very clear on this, is that landlords have an absolute obligation, and I don't care who that landlord is, whether it's a Labour MP or anybody else. I've been very clear, and I've been touched by speaking to Arab's family about what happened to Arab. And around Arab's law, I've been very clear about how tenants at the moment are at risk and fear, raising concerns around the Section 21 no fault evictions. This is why I'm absolutely determined to put more power in for tenants. And it doesn't matter who that landlord is, you have an obligation. I've talked about this before, James. Homes are homes, they're not assets. When you're a landlord, you have an obligation. So that's somebody's home,
So
and people need to feel safe in their home.
As someone, regardless of your job, as someone who cares passionately about tenants' rights, do you think that Jazz Athwell should be facing further censure from his employers, i.e. the Labour Party?
Well, I think Jazz has already said that he's appalled by those conditions that he's seen in his properties, and I'm sure he's
we've literally just been condemning the culture of I didn't know about it, it wasn't my fault, and yet here we are.
But he needs to make sure, as a landlord, that his properties are fit for purpose and that people are looked after.
So he gets a chance to redeem the situation, as it were.
Well,
let's move on from that. It's clear that that's what's happening. The Telegraph reported yesterday that you are considering the abolition of the right to buy scheme in its current form. Before you tell me whether that's true or not, a couple of my callers, my most informed callers, believe that right to buy has contributed to a form of social hierarchy creation in rented accommodation that perhaps helps understand how residents of Grenfell Tower could be treated as second or third class citizens. One expert who's worked in the sector for 40 years used the phrase loser housing, a perception that loser housing has come into play since people were offered the opportunity to buy their council houses. Are you thinking of, as the Telegraph says, ripping up Margaret Thatcher's right to buy policy?
Well, first of all, I think there's always been a level of stigma around council and social housing, whereas actually, I talked about being from a council estate when I grew up, but actually now it's a luxury to have social housing because there is so little of it. And the biggest problem that we've got, which has created this hierarchy and where people fear that they can't raise concerns, is because we don't have enough supply, which is why I've talked about we've got to fix supply. But in terms of the right to buy, I've said clearly that I think that people, if you've lived in a house for decades or you've that's your home, you've been renting it, that you should have an opportunity to buy it. But it shouldn't be the 2012 changes that the government made, which meant that people could buy their homes after a very short period of time on a very high discount. It meant that the taxpayers were not getting the value for money that they put into those homes, and we wasn't able to replace the social stock that we need. So we have to make sure the system is fair, and that's what we're consulting on at the moment, is not taking away people's right to buy, because I don't think that's the right decision to make, but also that we're making sure that we've got the housing stock, the social housing, that actually is quite critical at the moment, because far too many people who should be in social housing are at the mercy of private landlords because we haven't got the social housing we need in this country.
Finally, Angela Rayner, if I could catch you off guard, which is obviously increasingly difficult to do, but perhaps in, I don't know, an Ibizan nightclub, if I could catch you off guard, I'm pretty confident you'd be a caustic critic of the decision to take away winter fuel payments from millions of British pensioners, wouldn't you?
I'm completely angry by when we came into government and within a week of getting into government realising the significant black hole that the previous government knew about. The IFS was talking about the real difficult context. We all knew it was difficult context.
So why pick on them? Why start with pensioners?
Well, it's not a question of picking on them.
Well, it is. I think they feel like it is, certainly.
Well, it isn't, and I'll explain why. Because the winter fuel payment was a universal payment, regardless of what wealth or what income pensioners have got. We've means tested it because we felt that was the right decision. And there is 800,000 approximately pensioners currently that are entitled to pension credit that don't receive it. So first of all, I'd say to any listeners that think they're going to be really impacted on this, that first should check whether they're entitled to pension credit. Those that are just above that, and I completely appreciate that there's people that will not be eligible for it. The Household Support Fund, which the Chancellor has expanded, means that there will be additional support for people that need it as well. And the triple lock on pensions. But just to say as well, James, is that the previous government, we saw inflation go up to nearly 11%. That directly impacts on pensioners because of their income is fixed. So when inflation goes up, that hits them really hard in their pockets. Of course, the problems with the cost of energy prices as well. If you look at the money that the pensioners were given from the previous government 12, 18 months ago, but you look at how much they were having to pay out as a result of that, they were worse off because of the government mishandled the finances, and that's why it's important.
How long do you think that's going to hold for? I mean, I know that the previous governments were still referring back to 2010 when they were asked about their own fiscal policies. How long do you think you and your colleagues can blame difficult decisions on what you inherited, and when might we reasonably expect you to have improved the situation enough to stop having to hurt people like pensioners?
Well, it's not a question of just blaming them. Like, for example, there's decisions we're making.
Well, whatever verb you prefer.
Sure.
When's the deadline for it stopping? But there's
decisions we're making. For example, one of the first key decisions I made within a week, and the Chancellor was announcing around the planning policy framework so that we can get the infrastructure we need so we can grow our economy. We've been very clear on some of the decisions that we're making immediately so that we can grow the economy and pay for our public services. The previous government have criticised us in terms of the recommendations from the independent pay bodies. It was right, we did that. We had strikes crippling the UK before because of what the government was doing and their tone and what they've done previously. We've taken a different tract, which is about how we grow the economy, how we get our public services working, and how we can then start fixing these issues, whether it's the 2-child cap, which people were very angry about because we were very upfront about that we couldn't afford to do that immediately. But there are things that we're doing now which will make an absolute impact for the long-term future of our country, not sticky plaster gimmicks of here's a little thing over here, but actually fixing the fundamentals so that the economy will grow and we can pay for our public services.
Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Thank you for your time, and thank you because it was rather more time, I think, than was originally agreed. It's 10 to 11. 10:54 is the time. John says you can tell it's a new government. Someone from it has actually gone on James's show. The appearance of the Deputy Prime Minister hopefully does mark an opening of communications with government that was sadly absent during the last administration. And why would any politician not want to go on the most listened to talk show on commercial radio in the whole of the United Kingdom, not just on this radio station? So it beats me, but if you bump into any of the people that still avoiders like the play, perhaps you could ask them. Now, I mentioned yesterday's show, I mentioned Dave calling from Shepherd's Bush as being very memorable. More memorable, of course, for all of us was a call that I reminded you of that I took in the days after the tragedy from Shah, who lost his mum and his aunt in the tragedy. And Shah has rung in today, Shah Aglani from Kensington. How are you, mate?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Good to talk to you.
Always. And where are you? Not geographically, but emotionally and perhaps even intellectually on what we discovered yesterday.
Lost and bewildered by how the system I wouldn't say works or doesn't work. I think we have a system in place that is designed to fail in these sort of occasions. Designed to let the perpetrators, walk free. I think we have a system that requires an updating and laws that requires looking at. So this sort of things won't happen. But so long as we have the politicians which don't want to address the real issues, which is the safety laws on safety laws. And the lobbying question that influences the decision makings of our peers, I'm afraid things like this would happen again, as we saw in 26th of August in East London.
You were waiting. I think you were on hold while I was talking to Angela Rayner. Did anything she say? Anything she said encourage you? She addressed fairly directly some of the points you raised, Shah.
Yes, credit to her. We've already spoken with her about the need for change, and she has promised more time so we can discuss it further. But it requires the whole thing requires deep and precision work by the Prime Minister, who has background in prosecution and in law, and see what he can do to actually bring the laws up to date. So
we're back to that line on page 225, a task that only the government can undertake, and you're describing the repairing, if you like, of the ecosystem in which the tragedy could happen. The only way you can ensure it won't happen again is by changing the environment in which we all live, and the ecosystem in which Grenfell Tower could be put in the perilous position that it was put in by incompetence, greed, and dishonesty. Absolutely. And so long as there is, if there is no kind of punitive action on people who actually allow these to happen on their watch, I'm afraid things won't change. I'm going to ask you two questions that I asked the Deputy Prime Minister. The first is, what shocked you most? I don't know how much you actually learned yesterday, Shah. People that have been following the inquiry very, very closely probably didn't learn much at all. But did anything make your eyebrows raise?
The task that Sir Martin Moore-Beck took on was a mammoth one, truly. And, he basically put into words what we kind of were observing and we knew. So we have it now in front of us. But the thing is that, 7 years on, with all this information now on, I just don't know that if we see any sort of manslaughter charges.
Well, that brings me to the second question I was going to ask you, and in a way you've half answered it, which is whether you think 2-3 years from now we will have witnessed people being sent to jail for what happened to your mother and your aunt that night.
I don't think so. I doubt it much, because the bars on actually securing a conviction for those people are set so high by the system, that it's. I think if we had a prosecution from before inquiry, maybe we would have had a chance. But now, I doubt it.
I played our first ever conversation out to my listeners yesterday, and at the end of it, I tried to reassure you that there wouldn't be a cover-up. I want to try again to reassure you that there will be criminal charges.
Thank you, James, for your help and think in all these years. I've listened to your continuous highlighting of the issue, and you've been one of the most influential and prominent.
There hasn't been a cover-up, has there? I think we can say that there hasn't been a cover-up.
No,
thanks to Sir Martin.
We have most of the information now. I think the cover-up is probably lies with actually how the previous government managed the whole thing to kind of bring lesser charges.
So we'll have to wait and see. But I can't make you a promise on this occasion. I was a bit emotional last time and a bit unprofessional, probably as a consequence. But
thank you.
I can tell you what I believe. I think we will see proper charges brought.
I hope so. I hope, for all our sake, I hope that charges are serious charges are. And thank you, James, for all your support all these years.
Anyone would do in my position. Shah, thank you. It means a lot to me. You know it does.
Thank you.
You take care, please. Shah Aglani there, whose mother and aunt perished in the Grenfell Tower tragedy in circumstances that I still can't even recall without tearing up a bit, and you will know why if you listen to the call that Shah made to me in a much more emotional state in the days immediately after the tragedy. The consequences of which continue to reverberate around the country, but the consequences for the culprits now move into precisely the space that Shah described, a space of uncertainty and either pessimism or optimism that justice will be seen to be done. 5 minutes after 11. This is interesting. I think this unintentionally, which isn't a criticism of Nick, because it's just not what he actually texted in to prove, but to my eye, this really demonstrates what can happen when you prioritise profit over everything else and you expect the market to regulate itself. And he cites one really grim example of something that I hope Angela Rayner has very near the top of her to-do list. Hi, James. I'm a fire protection specialist, and the Grenfell disaster highlighted failings specific to Grenfell, but there are deficiencies in fire safety across a broader spectrum of scenarios. The lack of mandatory sprinklers in residential buildings and the routine installation of obsolete types of fire protection systems used to safeguard against commercial kitchen fires, for example, in hospitals, hotels and care homes, are just a couple of examples. So what Nick describes is expenditure by companies dedicated to producing profit, whether they are property companies or whether they are the people that operate the commercial kitchens or the hoteliers or the care homes. And that's why it needs to be law. That's why that line on page 225, which Peter Apps picked up on in an article for The Guardian today. Peter Apps written what is probably the seminal text about the Grenfell Tower tragedy. That line about this is a task that only government can achieve. You need to make it compulsory to do what is right. And it's the opposite of the ideology that has been in play for the last 14 years. It's the polar opposite of a kind of laissez-faire economics or a belief that the government needs to be smaller. How small does the government need to be? is the question you should be asking these people, because it is law, it is legislation and enactment of legislation and upholding of law that ensures people are safer in their homes. And there are for people in homes, there's one example there. The lack of mandatory sprinklers in residential buildings. So people like Nick cost money, and the things that he recommends cost money, and the only way you can ensure that the things that he recommends are implemented is if it's illegal not to do so. So that's why you need lefty lawyers. That's why you need red tape. That's why you need elfin safety. That's why you need all the things that the right-wing media has spent the best part of 3 decades trying to persuade you are your enemy. Maybe just a few of the ears currently listening to this will prick up and recognise that I've just described you. I'm going to describe me now. Whenever I turn my attention or try to turn your attention to matters educational, I think it's important to recognise 2 things. Number one is that my own experiences of education are on a very personal level, 40 odd years old, 30 or 40 years old. I've had some experience through educating my children in both the state and the private, and then the state again sector, new term starting, of course, this week. But I don't have any way of experiencing absence of privilege. And that's the second bit that I always bring to the table when we're discussing matters of education. Never more so than today. Because school exclusions have risen by a fifth in England alone in the past year. And I think that what I would have done once was describe being expelled from school as one of the best things that has ever happened to me. And then I read that children from low-income backgrounds, children with special educational needs and children with mental health issues are those most likely to miss learning. And also, of course, we end up spending more money on educating pupils outside the mainstream, where, to quote the latest report, quality and safety is less guaranteed. So suspensions have gone up by more than a fifth. This is research from the Institute for Public Policy Research. Cash-strapped councils spending increasing amounts on educating pupils outside the mainstream. And what I recognised reading that was that, yes, being expelled from school was in a way one of the best things that ever happened to me because of my class and my privilege. So because I had incredibly committed parents about whom I felt enormous guilt at being expelled, I ended up working harder for the last 3 months of my A-levels than I'd ever worked before in my life. I ended up prioritizing my own educational advancement, abandoning the somewhat fanciful idea of going to drama school and being determined to fulfill my parents' expectations of me going to a good university. Being chucked out of school gave me exactly the kind of head wobble that I was in desperate need of at that time in my life. But if I had been from a low-income background with perhaps parents who were not fully engaged in my education, or indeed across the information they needed to be across to advance my educational interests, if I had special educational needs or mental health issues and I got expelled from school, I think I would have slipped through the cracks. I really do. I did a tiny bit of mentoring at a school in South London 100 years ago, and I remember two things about it. I remember the discovery for me that teachers had to deal with children whose parents had absolutely no interest whatsoever in not even what they studied at school, but in whether they even turned up to school or not. Teachers I just didn't know that existed. It's odd in a way, because there were plenty of kids at my public school whose parents didn't really care what they did at school. That's why they paid tens of thousands of pounds every year to pass the responsibility on to others. We didn't even get to go home in the evenings. We had to sleep there. So there plenty. It was the aristocracy who invented the idea that children should be seen and not heard. So I don't want to in any way suggest that poorer people are, by definition, more neglectful parents. Some of the most neglectful parents I've ever come across in my life are some of the wealthiest people I've ever met. I farm it all out, if not to nanny, then to school, if not to school, then to servants. I mean, the list is almost endless. But of course, those servants, nanny, public school, that's a safety net that catches a child whose parents can't carry them or whose parents have dropped them. If you don't have that safety net, then I presume that being expelled from school is the single most awful thing that could happen to you. It takes away the only adults in your life who are demonstrating any interest in whether or not you even turn up every day and what you do when you get there. And then something else happened to me. The other bit that I remember from school, and I may have mentioned this to you before. So you're talking about 15-year-old boys who are, 6 foot tall and in some cases physically imposing. I always remember if you played rugby against lads that were a couple of years older than you when you were 13, it could be a terrifying experience. So I watched a female teacher who was 5 foot nothing in her stocking feet deal with a boy who just stood up in the middle of class and walked to the front of the classroom and didn't do anything else. He didn't speak, he didn't threaten, he didn't shout, he just stood there. I don't know why that haunts me. Haunts is not quite the right word. He just stood there. It was a sort of an articulation in a way of a form of power. What can she do to make him sit down again? That's the kind of kid that ends up getting excluded and ends up getting suspended and ends up getting expelled. And then the second thing is something that happened this week, oddly, when I was on a bus. I was on the top deck of a bus, and 3 kids got on, one of whom you can sometimes tell, can't you? I don't know whether there's a sort of almost a manic nature, but one of whom you could tell was going to behave badly. The sort of way that they swung their way down the top deck of the bus, and he starts spitting. He starts spitting out of the window. Originally at his quotes mates end quotes who were down there, and subsequently at anybody else whenever the bus stopped, at anybody else who was waiting at the bus stop. And to be fair, his 2 friends were discouraging him or seeking to make him stop, but also finding it quite amusing. And then an older fella on the bus told him to stop. So I was a few rows in front, not entirely sure what was going on and a little bit reluctant to sort of turn around and make it clear that I was checking it out. But the reason why I know he was spitting was because an older fella said, if you don't stop that spitting, I will turf you off this bus. And the kid pointed out that he wouldn't be able to do that. And that's when I thought, oh, Lord, I can't let this unfold. Can I? If this older gentleman puts himself in potential legal trouble by physically trying to manhandle the youth off the bus, then I'm going to have to help him. And like most people, don't really want to get involved. So I'm listening, I'm earwigging the standoff. I'm hoping someone else on the bus, if it does reach a point where someone has to do something, I'm hoping someone else on the bus does something. And happily, the bus driver then comes up the stairs and tells this kid that he's got it all on camera and the police are coming and he can either get off the bus now or wait and talk to the police. And the kid denies that he'd done anything, at which point I can say happily, no, it was that one there. It wasn't those two. He's the one that's been spitting. And it's just that little moment where you wondered whether he was going to call the bus driver's bluff. I don't know whether the police had been called or not. I'm talking about 13, 14. And what happens next? Now, I think that's why children get suspended and expelled. And I could sit here and be all bleeding heart liberal and hand-wringing lovey about it, but I wouldn't know what to do in that circumstance. In a sense, he was expelled from the bus, right? In a sense, he was suspended from the bus. He was removed. His behaviour got him removed from the environment he wanted to be in and was supposed to be in. And at the moment, in that moment, I thought, good, that's the right thing to do. And I know a bus isn't a school, and I know a bus driver isn't a teacher. But I was relieved to be relieved of responsibility for his behaviour, or at least responsibility for what might have happened to the older gentleman who was in a bit of a pickle, wasn't he, really? Because if the minute he laid a hand on this lad, all bets are off. So I was not going to let him lay a hand on, but from the point of view of helping him, like, it's not worth it, mate, or whatever. Happily, that didn't happen because the bus driver was so on the ball. But then, of course, that could have compromised his safety. So what can you do with a child like that in a classroom? What can you do with a persistently disruptive child? Because expelling them or suspending them, if they're posh-ish, wealthy, privileged, might be just the wake-up call they need. But if they're not, that might be the beginning of the end of the chance of them becoming valued contributors to society. What do you reckon? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So come at this from whatever angle you want. If you're a teacher, what would you do with the boy at the front of the class? If you're a bus passenger, what would you do with the boy spitting out of the window? If you are a parent, an observer of teenage behaviour, what would you do with the child who's disrupting everybody else's education? What's the best way in which to conduct these kind of conundrums? Because I can't believe that chucking them out of school is the best way forward unless you impose a sort of utilitarian equation and calculate what's best for everybody involved and sacrifice the future of these young people upon the altars of everybody else's prospects. Maybe that's the only way forward and we just got to suck it up. I hope not, but I don't know. What can you tell me? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Any of those angles on that, anything you please, because they seem to me, and I could have got this wrong, wouldn't be the first time, they seem to me to all speak to the same subject matter, which is adults' ability to, quotes, control, end quotes, a young person who refuses to do what they're told or refuses to behave. And I'm as baffled by it now as I was when I watched that 15-year-old boy get up in the middle of class for no reason whatsoever and just stand at the front of the classroom, to the frustration, shall we say, of the teacher who was physically incapable. And remember, this is why I mentioned my own school days, because I would have been grabbed by the ear or by that little bit tuft of hair that grows just out of your top of your sideburn. I would have been physically, what's the word I'm even looking for? Corralled back into. You couldn't do that at my school when I was young because you'd get beaten up effectively by adults. None of us want to go back to that. So what happens instead? It's 11:19. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Karen says, you've got to love some bus drivers. My best friend was saying goodbye to her daughter at the bus stop. They'd had an argument and the daughter was sulking. My best friend asked her for a kiss goodbye when the bus drew up. The daughter refused and stropped. That's a great verb, Karen. Well done. I think you might have just invented it. Stropped onto the bus The bus driver called up the bus to the daughter, "I'm not moving till you give your mum a kiss." And she did, laughing. That's lovely. I did conclude the story. I've got one complaint. The lad got off the bus. Maybe I didn't make that clear, actually. So the lad concerned got off the bus and the situation, they all got off the bus, in fact, the situation resolved itself. But it didn't have to. It's a tipping point, if you like, in an individual scenario that I described, but also in the education system, I think. And it's mystery hour at 12. I've got a guest coming in at 11:45, and you mustn't let me forget, I've got an unhinged headline, and I think we're going to bury Smear Keir, because he's Prime Minister now. But we've got an unhinged headline that allows us to bury Smear Keir and open up a competition. So the producer's idea this. I said, you must come up with some ideas for new features on the programme. And the producer said, why don't we have a competition for the listeners to come up with ideas for new features on the programme? And I thought, that's not quite what that's not what I... So that may happen as well. But first, Alison's in Barnet. Alison, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, well, you described perfectly a scenario that I had with my own son, who by the time was 13 or 14 was a 6-foot-tall lad who played rugby for his school. And, I mean, up until he was about 12 or 13, he'd been doing very well at school. I'd never had any behavioural problems with him. But unfortunately, his father passed away when he was 11. And this had that had a very profound effect on him. Now, I was lucky in the fact that he went to a really good grammar school in North London, and they really worked with me to keep my son engaged. And he scraped through his GCSEs, but he got to the point where he was about to go into sixth form, and he just said, I'm not going. Right. And I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do? Yeah. So as a compromise, I got him into the local college where he was going to study for a BTEC, which is what he wanted. He said, the school can't support me. It's not what I want to do, what they offer. I said, absolutely fine. All started off well. He was 16, going on 17 by this age, and I would leave him, not to his own devices, but get the bus to college. I had 2 smaller children. I had to get them to school and then get myself to work. It wasn't very long before college started ringing me and saying he wasn't turning up. So on occasion, I would leave work in a hurry, drive home, get him out of bed, take him to college, etc. And then one morning, I did this routine where I left work, came home, went into his bedroom. I said, come on now, please don't do this to me. You've got to go to college. I'll wait downstairs for you. Well, 20 minutes passed, nothing. Then he strolled down in his underpants to the kitchen, and I said, what are you doing? You've got to go. I've got to go back to work. And he just looked at me and said, well, what are you going to do? And I thought, that's right. What am I going to do? And I went over to him and I sort of poked him in the back and I said, I'm going to take you. And with that, he turned around and sort of faced up to me, loomed over me.
Oh, dear.
And I said, I'm going to call the police. And he said, oh, please, don't embarrass yourself. And I said, no, I'm going to. And he said, well, what are they going to do? Well, anyway, I did call the police. And they came to the house. And I have to say, it was awful because they kind of took his side. I got a barrage of misogyny, and my son standing there, rolling his eyes, sort of cocking a wink at the policeman as if to say, you see this?
But he wasn't brave. I mean, it's certainly a very long story. I hope we're quite near the end of it. I don't want to add to your burden. But he hadn't broken any laws, had he?
Well, I mean, he was kind of threatening and aggressive. And I think as a single mum with a 6-foot son, I was like, oh, my God, what are my options? What can I do?
So what did happen? How did the situation resolve itself?
Well, they said, well, come on, Sonny Jim, put your trousers on, let your mum take you, stop being a naughty boy. And he went. But I have to say, I mean, that, I don't know whether that was the right or wrong thing to do, but I was sort of at the end of my tether.
Yeah. And of course, you're describing the polar opposite of what we're talking about, which is a child who doesn't have any parental support at home or who doesn't have any concern for their child's welfare. It sounds horrible, Alison. It really does. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. In Scotland, and this is increasingly the case, the story appears to be rather different. Cases of exclusion have fallen from a high of 44,794 down to 11,676. So there are wobbles and there are spikes, there are ups and downs, but that is the overall picture, which suggests they're doing something rather different in Scotland from what they are doing here. But what happens when you exclude a child from school? I presume it makes everything worse. And that is, perhaps I needed to be a little clearer. That is the question that I'm essentially asking. What happens when you exclude a child from school? Or what can you do with someone else's child, whether you're on a bus or whether you're a teacher or whether you're in a position of authority, who simply refuses to behave, for want of a slightly less Victorian-sounding word? Dwayne is in Southampton. Dwayne, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. How you doing?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so just in answer to your question, as someone who's obviously gone through the education system myself, I'm 19 now, so haven't left it too long ago.
More recently than me, Dwayne.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so I was just thinking myself, the best way to approach this situation would be to do it amicably and diplomatically. So essentially just finding what the root cause is of why the child is behaving like that, and then trying to approach it from an area of understanding why they're doing that and how you can solve it that way. Because I think sort of condemning them isn't the best approach, because it just leads them to resent the system that basically booted them out.
Chris has written, if you cut the cord completely, they're likely to be taken in by gangs, and they could be lost for a long time. Unfortunately, he spoils it rather by going on to recommend national service. But are you speaking from experience, or are you speaking from a sort of overview? Because I suspect teachers would try that, but it's the sanction of last resort that becomes problematic, I think, isn't it? What do you do if all that fails?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there's always a way to solve it sort of diplomatically. But coming from experience as someone who's not the best behaved during my part of school, and the way that I was dealt with, I think that if the teachers came from more of an area of understanding rather than just the straight detentions and things like that, then it would have been
How quickly do you get a reputation, I wonder? How quickly do you become a kid that teachers think it's not worth engaging with? Because the examples that I've provided, all has failed. There is someone trying to cause trouble, and in a school environment, you can do what you describe on the top deck of a 267. I'm not sure you can, but that's getting inside that mindset. But I like your optimism, the idea that everybody is reachable. I actually agree with you, but teachers may not have the time or the resources or even sometimes the skills.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess that could be an area of training that the teachers could go through, and you also need to work with the parents as well of the kids to sort of find out more. And maybe it's like a case of doing meetings. That's something that helped me was having a meeting with my parents and the teachers and figuring out why.
But again, that means your parents want you to be. I sort of thinking that sometimes the expulsions are likely to be happening more to the children whose parents are not engaging or whose parents are not as concerned as yours obviously are. When you're older than you are now, you realise how lucky you are to have parents who care in these kind of contexts, even though when you're at school it can sometimes seem a little bit annoying. 11:30, and I hope the same happens to Alison's son as well. I hope he reaches a point in his life where he realises how lucky he was to have a mum who cared so much about his welfare, even when he clearly and plainly resented her for it. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 26 minutes to 12. I'm not sure she knows that we were talking about her belief that Unhinged headline had run its course while she was on holiday last week, but we've had a chat about it and we've decided that Unhinged headline has not run its course. However, Smear Keir has, because attempts to smear Keir Starmer in the run-up to the general election were, of course, designed by the right-wing media to prevent him from being elected. Criticism of the Prime Minister now, of course, is a very different thing. So, shortly, I think I will play you the rather jolly and possibly my all-time favourite jingle for what will probably be the final time. But we are confident that with a little bit of editorial oversight, we do not need to say goodbye to
Unhinged headline.
Largely thanks to the work of Alistair Heath, the editor of the Sunday Telegraph and a columnist on the Daily Telegraph. If I can ever be bothered, I'll put together a top 10 of headlines that are the very definition of unhinged, by far the most unhinged headline monger. And I know that the writer doesn't write the headlines themselves, but the sub-editor usually gets a fairly clear idea of what's wanted from the copy that appears below the headline. And this is, I mean, just think back over the last 14 years. Think what we've learnt about Grenfell in the last 24 hours. And Alistair Heath chooses today, in the Daily Telegraph inevitably, to write this right under this headline. Starmer is leading the nastiest, most vicious government in a generation. Now that's a generation that would include Jacob Rees-Mogg as a government minister, describing people who died in Grenfell Tower as having lacked common sense. It would include a prime minister reportedly calling for the bodies to pile high rather than inconvenience the lives of people like him. It's a generation that saw more penalties issued to Downing Street during lockdowns or for behaviour, for breaches of lockdown rules, than any other address in the entire country. It's a generation that saw an actual Home Secretary reveal that she dreamed of seeing genuine refugees and asylum seekers being deported forever to Rwanda. It's a generation that gave us Nadine Dorries as a Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. But no, Starmer is leading the nastiest, most vicious government in a generation. So for now at least, thanks largely to Alistair Heath, this is safe.
Unhinged headline.
But this, I'm afraid, is something of a swan song.
Snake here, snake here, snake here.
Shall we play the long version just as a fond and final farewell? I think we should.
Snake here, snake here, snake here.
It's the only one I've ever danced to, I think. And you can see me dance on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. Is there a bell? Every time I've got to go and have a look at it, actually. Is there a bell on you? Can you ring that bell? You subscribe to YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe. Subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. That's what they all do, isn't it? One of my godsons was looking at something the other day, and he had 313 million subscribers. First of all, I didn't know you could watch YouTube on my telly just by pressing a couple of buttons, but my 9-year-old godson comes in and just goes bing, 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 and there it is. And I know that's a little bit remiss of me, but I never feel the need to watch YouTube on my telly, although perhaps I should start watching this. Me, as in, you know. And secondly, I said, what do you want to watch? And he said something, and Andrea Jenkins, flipping gestures at members of the public, of course. But no, Keir Starmer, the worst, what is it? The nastiest, most vicious government in a generation. And then he said, I want to watch this. So we'll put it on. I looked at the screen and said, how many subscribers has he got? And the lad says, cool as you like, 313 million, Uncle James. 313 million subscribers. How many people are there in the world? Obviously more than 330, but they're just extraordinary. So it's time I up my game. It's time I up my game on YouTube. So this time next year, Rodney, we'll have 313 million. No, we won't, but we might have a few more than we have now. 11:38 is the time. Daniel's in Mitcham to take us back to this question of whether or not expulsion stroke suspension is the worst thing possible for the kids on the receiving end of it, but is it the best thing possible for everybody else? What do you think, Daniel?
It's a really, really difficult question to answer.
It really is.
I understand, the plight of the teachers are that they have so many young people that they have to kind of cater for, and they have to make sure it's a safe environment for them to learn and be educated. But equally, on the other side, when young people are excluded from schools, they rarely ever get back into mainstream education, and as a result, their life chances are basically truncated. Now, I worked in various different capacities with young people over the past 11 years. I actually did work as a targeted youth support worker, so I was working with young people who were at the edge of being excluded from schools permanently to try and stop that from happening.
Who calls you in?
So when can I mention the borough?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, so it was the London Borough of Sutton. Basically, there was a restructure which basically meant that the schools had to kind of put money together in a pot with the local authority to try and create a youth service which was tailored to trying to stop young people from, first of all, being excluded from schools, but also from being removed from their homes and placed in local authority care.
So
the
school or the social services would sort of activate you and your colleagues?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it works.
I've got a horrible feeling I know how this ends with cuts and austerity and the cessation of the service.
Yeah, you know exactly how it is.
Boy. I wish I was wrong, Daniel, as you know. But let's go back to when you were doing it and the kind of child, and obviously we're going to generalise a bit, that you encountered when you turned up to help.
So we had to kind of take a holistic look at all of the young people that we were working with. And as you can imagine, there was turbulence in their private life. Sometimes it was because of parents that didn't show too much interest. They weren't necessarily emotionally available. It may have also been because they kind of dealt with some kind of a tragedy in their life. I remember working with one young person who was excluded because his behaviour was unmanageable, but his mum had been given a cancer diagnosis.
Oh, God. Well, Alison's boy had lost his dad, hadn't he? But the school may not even have been fully aware of that, or every teacher every year wouldn't have known that, would they? Well,
the teacher that excluded him eventually because he was excluded was fully aware of that. And I think they were using our service as, because in order to exclude, you need to be able to kind of show that you've put in a number of different interventions to show that you've tried your best. And sometimes people don't act in good faith and they use your service as a means of saying, see, we put this in place and that didn't work, so now we can exclude. What I wanted to say, though, because I also worked on the other side, I worked as a supply teacher, and anybody knows supply teachers going to schools, they probably get some of the worst behaviour in classrooms.
Yeah,
but I was fine, actually. It was really, really good, and I kind of tried to strike up a relationship with young people almost immediately through humour. But more importantly, I think this could be helpful, is the way in which you engage young people has a massive difference. I say you, but I mean all of us. I think if I engage a young person who has problematic behaviour as inherently problematic, they pick up on that. They're not silly, they're not stupid, they understand how they're being treated, and they may play into that kind of stereotype. I think if you give them responsibility and you try to build a relationship with them, then you start to kind of reimagine who they are. But then
you need a lot of time and space to do that, don't you?
Not necessarily, not always. I mean, sometimes it could have been as simple as we were reading, I don't know, like Dracula in like an English class, and we're just kind of giving up roles for people to read, and maybe you engage with young people and put on like a playful voice or something along the lines of that, and you try and see if you can encourage some of the young people that maybe would disrupt to take part. And if you set an example, for instance, by using a silly voice, it kind of shows that actually we can be creative and I'm not going to penalise you for doing the exact same thing. And then there can be more engagement. They may not necessarily learn as much about the topic as they can, but as we're trying to teach them, but at least they kind of buy into the idea that we're doing this together.
What would I don't want to be glib, but we are a bit short of time, and I've got Henry Riley waiting to report on some interesting new developments with regards to the sewage situation in our waterways. Describe a success to me. Describe one of your successes from your days doing, more so the exclusion than the teaching when you were called in by the school. What would a success look like?
So a success that I had would have been when I was working with one young person who was excluded from the school in Sutton and went to a local pupil referral unit. And he was a really, really nice guy, but he just had some personal issues that he was really, really kind of struggling with. And we worked together. We built a relationship. I used to take him to a local boxing club in Sutton, and we used to kind of do activities there. It was also, can I shout out the club, because it's a really, really great place, and
thanks for checking as well. I appreciate that. Of course you can.
No worries. So it's called Raptor Strike Force Martial Arts. The guy who owns it, his name is Wayne, and he knew that I couldn't pay him as such initially, but he let me bring young people down there because he understood basically that we needed to kind of have a place for young people to be. And so we were able to kind of develop a relationship around positive activities, able to exercise as well, able to kind of use that as a segue into understanding what life was like for him and feeding that back to social workers, schools, and so forth and so on. and he managed to get back into a mainstream school.
Well, that's jackpot. And as we've already established, some of the people that were going to do that are no longer able to do it, yourself included, because of that political ideology built upon the idea that the global financial crisis in 2008 was caused by there being too many people like Daniel working with excluded pupils in Sutton. Thank you, Daniel. I warned you I needed to be brief because Henry Riley is in Putney, in fact, where Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, has just been setting out his new water bill. There is a thirst, if you'd pardon the pun, for actual legislation, and there is an urgent need, as Fergal Sharkey has frequently reminded us, Henry, of action in this sector precisely. So what has happened?
Well, James, good morning. Joining you from the Thames Boat Club, which, of course, Steve Reed has chosen this location in Putney because this is where the Oxford-Cambridge boat race happens. And he was outraged, as he said in his speech, that for the first time this year, there were restrictions because of an E. coli outbreak, pollution and sewage in the Thames that meant the event had to be scaled back. Of course, even this morning, actually, James, as I speak, I'm on the balcony. There are still people donning their lycra and heading into kayaks and canoes. So the River Thames obviously used on a frequent basis. The main headline from Steve Reed's speech, there were sort of four main components, but really was getting tough with regards water bosses. As he set out in his speech, he's not afraid to try and send them to jail.
This bill will make it easier for the Environment Agency to bring criminal charges. It will create new, tougher penalties, including imprisonment for water companies if companies obstruct Environment Agency and Drinking Water Inspectorate investigations.
So if there is an investigation, Steve Reed making it clear you cannot obstruct it. The other three things very quickly, James, the fines, currently £300 for pollution breaches. That will rise because at the moment, for the sort of minor breaches, it's simply not enforced. The third thing, storm overflows, currently non-emergency ones are monitored. That's around 14,000. They'll now monitor the 7,000 emergency overflows. And then lastly, with regards bonuses, CEOs and senior leadership, if they fail the consumer, if they fail the environment, they will not get their bonus. In the case of Liv Garfield, she got a bonus of $584,000 last year from Severn Trent, despite that particular company facing a £2 million fine. So, James, Steve Reed really getting tough on water bosses and the water companies.
Do we know what Fergal thinks?
No, well, Chris Packham was here. I know it's not Fergal Sharkey, but he was nodding away during the speech. Fergal Sharkey says that it doesn't quite go far enough, but Fergal Sharkey wants to see more regulation, for example, but Steve Reed sort of made clear in his speech, look, this is the start of it, and then as part of this government of service, we will eventually get there. So the message to Fergal is be patient.
Lovely stuff. Give our love to Chris, won't you?
Will do. He's still here, so I will go and see him.
I'm serious. Make sure you do. He's a great showbiz chum of mine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. I'm introducing him to all my top contacts. You can hear my full disclosure interviews, of course, with Fergal Sharkey and Chris Packham via Global Player. Henry Riley there, live in Putney, where Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, has just been setting out this new water bill, which, it seems to reach some of the parts that previous bills have failed to reach. Up next, I'm going to introduce you to a journalist and author, a Pulitzer Prize winner, no less, who has dug a little deeper than I think anybody else so far into what she describes as Autocracy Incorporated, or crucially, the dictators who want to run the world. And it's fascinating. It's quite possibly urgent as well. 11:48 is the time. It's 11:52, and time to get quite serious before we get rather silly after 12 o'clock with Mystery Hour. Because, as you know, I've mentioned a few times a sense of the tectonic plates of our world order shifting beneath our feet. And, of course, the thing about tectonic plates is that you don't always notice it in the moment. You only notice it when the effects have essentially crystallised. Anne Applebaum's new book, Autocracy Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World, I think plays pretty powerfully into this sense of something rather significant changing in the way that the world works, or in the way that countries do business. And Anne joins me now. You identify autocracies, centralised autocracies. What is a centralised autocracy, and what is different about what you analyse here compared to what we might describe ourselves as being used to?
So the book describes a network a group of dictatorships who do not share a common ideology. So we're talking about communist China and nationalist Russia and theocratic Iran and, I don't know, Bolivarian socialist Venezuela and whatever North Korea is.
I was waiting to see what adjective you were going to apply to North Korea after that sort of ideological.
But the point is they're very different. I mean, some of them believe in God and some of them don't, and some of them want to build utopia and some of them don't, but they are all countries led either by a single person or by a ruling party who seek to rule without checks and balances, without press, without independent courts, without transparency, without accountability. And they have begun to cooperate together, both to make sure that they can all continue to rule that way. These are all, many of them, very, very wealthy people. These are billionaires to stay in power, to keep their money. And also to make sure that ideas that would challenge their rule don't win the argument. So what do they not like? They don't like the rule of law. They don't like the language of liberal democracy. They don't like accountability. They don't like rights. They don't like human rights. And they don't like it.
It sounds like they could be running for the leadership of the Conservative Party if we're going to stick with that checklist.
You don't have to be, there's one of the arguments of the book is you don't have to live in Russia or China to feel this way. But they have this, they don't want to hear it, and they would like to push back against it, both inside their own countries and increasingly around the world.
Well, crucially around the world. Our mutual friend Bill Bradder unlocked the mystery of Putin for me when he just described the simple necessity of holding on to his stolen money, and
that's a lot of it.
Explaining a lot of the mission that's in place. But as you point out, that won't necessarily probably does actually apply to almost all of the regimes that you describe and identify in the book. The corollary of this is the disappearance or the diminishment of what we would once have called the liberal world order. That I think you feel has gone effectively as a homogenous force.
It's not gone, but it lacks some strategic thinking and organization. I mean, the fact that the democratic world, however broadly you describe it, actually was able to unite in the defense of Ukraine over the last couple of years is evidence that it's still there and that there are still things that we have in common. But we haven't really got to the next level of thinking about how we're going to compete in terms of information, in terms of technology, and also, are we going to defeat the kleptocracy that they represent? Because some of what they do is here. I mean, so. This isn't like a Cold War situation where there's, Berlin Wall and it divides good guys from bad guys. There's some kind of geographic division. So the behaviors that they promote, we have also here in London, in the form of anonymously owned property all over the city, which is where, Chinese or Malaysian or Angolan billionaires hide their money. And so fighting them, part of it is changing our own system too.
Is London more dirtier, if you like? Is London dirtier in this field than many other cities?
You have competition.
Right.
Luxembourg. There's competition, but it's certainly a feature of life here. Yeah. And it's something that we've come to accept as normal, almost as if it was like a natural rock formation. Like there is this thing of anonymous companies and they just exist, anonymously owned companies, and we can't do anything about it. I mean, it's ridiculous. We could make them illegal. We could make people present a passport when they create a company. Yes. And there's some movement in that direction, but it could be more definitive.
Further and faster. I think Donald Trump inevitably pops up at this point in the conversation because, A, he certainly has demonstrated some ambitions perhaps or some dreams of being an autocrat, and B, that's the downside of the Ukraine model, isn't it, is what might have happened had he been in the White House when Putin sent his tanks to Kyiv.
He certainly likes the idea of ruling without courts and without press. I mean, he says so, and he certainly
and he publicly admires a lot of the people that are currently doing
that's so. Also, and he's also fundamentally transactional, which is what they are as well. So his interest is in staying in power, making more money, keeping his money. You know, in that sense, he's like them. And he's also not interested, and he says this repeatedly in many different ways, in being the leader of some kind of democratic alliance that will push back against kleptocracy. And
if not America, then who?
Then if not America, then who? It's a good question. I mean, there isn't really another country that has that kind of power. I mean, you could imagine some league of Europeans emerging in that role, and maybe that would happen. I don't want to give Europeans no agency, but it's it's true that without the U.S., it's harder.
I should stress, because otherwise the analysis would be unbearably bleak, that you do offer up a if not a solution, then certainly a prescription for improvement.
Well, there's no such thing as inevitability in history. There is no inevitable reason why our civilization declines and there's rises. I mean, there's choices that we make are today affect what happens tomorrow. Again, thinking about coalitions, thinking about a coalition to push back against kleptocracy, thinking also, by the way, about working with the opponents of the autocracies. I mean, actually, almost everything I know about kleptocracy and even about London comes from the Russian opposition. I mean, they're the ones who studied this and figured it out. I mean, it's not an accident that Browder knows about it, because that's where he learned about it. Listening to them, because they understand their regimes much better than we do. But they're even, focusing on how to win the war in Ukraine, not just defend the Ukrainians, but win it. Focusing on, cleaning up our own systems, thinking harder about social media and regulating it, by which I do not mean censoring it. I mean applying the laws of real life to the online world, or giving people some control over their data, some access to the control over algorithms. I mean, there are a lot of things we could be thinking about that we aren't focused on.
Which brings me to my final question, and I suspect you delivered your manuscript before the full extent of Elon Musk's impact upon Twitter had become clear, because he gets, I think, just one mention in the book. How significant a player is he in the processes that you're describing in the book, actually and potentially?
So, yes, certainly the idea that one of our major social media platforms is now controlled by somebody who is both amplifying Russian propaganda and amplifying far-right propaganda, and it seems deliberately seeking to create dissent and division here in Britain as well as elsewhere.
Very much so. Especially here in Britain.
Especially here is a new development of a kind I just don't think we've thought through yet. But again, it's not as if he's a force of nature that can't be controlled. We regulate all kinds of industries. We regulate the financial industry. We think about how to make social media compatible with democracy, and with our form of with the need for good debate. I mean, it seems to me a completely legitimate subject for discussion, in parliaments everywhere.
Urgent. Not just legitimate. And indeed, one comes away from the book with a sense of the urgency of some of these issues being addressed sooner rather than later. Autocracy Inc., the dictators who want to run the world. It's quite nice to have winner of the Pulitzer Prize on the front cover of your book, isn't it?
And I have to tell you, I won the Pulitzer Prize 20 years ago, and they've been sticking it on book covers ever since.
Anne. It's box fresh. That's 20 years. We're 200 years from now. And Applebaum, many thanks indeed for your time, and the book comes highly recommended by me. Thank you. It is 12:01.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
A moment, if you would, of self-congratulation. I know what you're thinking. What do you mean a moment? You spend 3 hours doing it every day. But isn't it nice to be able to move so effortlessly through the territory that we've explored together today, from the tragedy of Grenfell to the seriousness, but the largely experience-based analysis of excluding and expelling and suspending children from school, to Anne Applebaum's extraordinarily important new book, and now to the absurdity and silliness of Mystery Hour, not to mention stopping off halfway through that journey to spend 15 minutes talking to the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. I do sometimes have days where I think, we're doing all right, aren't we? And we played Unhinged headline as well. So thank you for keeping me company as we continue to what's the word we want to address the new Britain, the sort of post-Tory period into which we are now moving. Happily, some things stay the same. And top of that list is Mystery Hour, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. You can ring in with a question, a mystery, a conundrum, a riddle, something that needs to be solved, something you know must admit an answer, but you're dashed if you know what that answer is. 03456060973. And then you can ring in with a answer. Then you can ring in with the answer to the question that someone else has asked. You're not allowed to look stuff up, obviously. My favourite contribution of the week will win a brand new Mystery Hour board game, which is a real thing and an awful lot of fun. In fact, I can prove it to you. Go to mysteryhour.co.uk now. Go on, I'll wait. mysteryhour.co.uk, where you can see and learn more and crucially buy your very own Mystery Hour board game. However, you can get one for free if you make my favourite contribution of the week. Terms and conditions at lbc.co.uk. I think that's it, isn't it? Let's just crack on, shall we? 12:07 is the time. David is in Edgware. David, question or answer?
You know, James, I've always thought that if I'm first on, I'm going to be funny and say answer, but I'm realising now it's not particularly funny, so it's a question.
let David be an example to us all. Carry on, David.
News agents or corner shops, those sort of places, how do they make money? You never see anyone doing a full shop in there. They're often, right by a big supermarket.
Yes.
And people go in and buy a drink or a chocolate bar. They're never full.
I think that part of the answer is probably breach of employment regulations because they are largely family owned. I think that's the type that you're talking about rather than a sort of a chain, and they're just open all the time. So I've thought about this a lot with places near me. So I don't know what the hourly rate for the person working there would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually below minimum wage sometimes or below the London living wage, but it's enough to keep the business up and running.
But when you consider these places in busy areas where rent is probably quite high, unless they own the building,
there'll be some of that there. There'll be. I mean, the short answer is they make a profit in the same way that everybody else does. But the idea that because you're like me, you sometimes think I haven't seen anyone in there for half an hour.
It'll be next to a big.
So we'll speak to someone who runs one. We'll speak to someone who runs one and ask them what the kind of rough SP is on how well they do. I would have thought they're more under threat from delivery services than perhaps we appreciate because the little things you need that you haven't got in your big weekly shop, you're going to pop to your local shop to get and pay a small premium for that. More than you'd pay in your big supermarket, but now you've got the
you can just get them at your fingertips.
Well, big cities you do. I don't think Mum can have her groceries sort of delivered for free, like tiny amounts delivered for free.
The delivery thing might help them to one aspect because the only time we go to our newsagent is to pick up a package that we've had delivered.
Oh, that's true. But but you don't. What about booze and cigarettes?
No, yeah, well...
That's quite big.
But how much can they sell? When you're considering down the road you've got a Tesco Express or something like that. And
well, we have. You're in Edgware. Well, no, that's true, because the shops are there as well. How is business for the average family corner shop in a town or a city, is what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people say it's a struggle, but I want to know, how do any of them make enough money to keep going?
Yeah, okay, that's a fact. So it's a little bit off the Mystery Hour beaten track, but hey, what is the point of having beaten tracks if you never go off them or something? David, thank you. Finn's in Leek. Finn, question or answer?
Oh, good afternoon, James. It's actually Tim. It's a question, but just before I do that, I got permission off the producer just to say a massive, massive thank you to you and all of the production team for the Mystery Hour, because I was very seriously ill a couple of years ago, open heart surgery, and the podcast really, really got me through. I've done the 500 at least 3 times each.
Good Lord.
The only trouble now is it's like watching The Great Escape. I can mouth the words, but I certainly enjoyed.
What was it, do you think, that you found so soothing? Because, I mean, listening to everything once, I can get my head around. But what was it that made you, particularly during that time of needing distraction, that made it work as a repeat offer? do you think?
Well, this is a compliment rather than an insult, but it used to help me drift off to sleep. So very often I wouldn't actually hear a complete episode.
Oh, I see.
And then I'd kind of wake up at 5 a.m. and I'd think, what's he talking about, David Cameron, the Prime Minister?
So you'd fill in some of the gap. What a lovely compliment. I thank you, Tim, and I'm glad that you've I'm glad that you're better. I'm glad that you've made a recovery. Question or answer?
The question, please.
Carry on.
And it's the second time call. Another question about heat, and it relates to one of your things on the Mystery Hour about being a hungry student on a building site and ordering yourself a Coke, and the rest of the crew had a cup of tea, and they all laughed at you.
That's right.
And I think the principle behind it being that hot drinks raise your core temperature, so they'll cool you down in the summer. So my question is actually the converse of that. So if hot drinks keep you cool in the summer, would a cool drink sort of be better for you in the winter? So should we be drinking sort of tea in the summer?
Or having an ice cream, having a lolly.
Yeah, having a lolly. And linked to that, I know I'm only allowed one question, but linked to that, does it also apply to food? So should we be having curries and stews in the summer and salads in the winter? And perhaps that's why curries are such a big thing in Asia. So yeah, my question.
So you mean chili heat rather than heat?
Yeah, that's right.
So you raise your core temperature by eating lots of chili, and you cool yourself down by eating lots of chili, and that's why they're popular and I think it's more to do with no, I don't know. What a great question. I wonder whether you could have come up with that question if you hadn't inhaled the whole Mystery Hour archive on at least 3 occasions.
Probably not. No, as I say, I know I can mouth the words to the 500 now.
Well, don't do that in public.
No, absolutely not.
12 is the time. Tim, thank you, mate. That's lovely stuff. So I think it's true. And the anecdote, I only have about 12 anecdotes. He's referring to the Doncaster building site period of my anecdote archive. And that was, various stories come from that for fortnights. It must be one of the longest fortnights ever. And the idea that having a hot drink when you're hot actually cooled you down more than a cold drink did, something that I discovered when all the lads on the building site sent me to the cafe to buy them teas, and they told me to get myself a drink, and I got myself a Coca-Cola. And anyway, does the opposite happen? When I am cold, if I drink something cold, would it activate my body to start heating me up? I just kind of doubt it, but we'll see. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I got a couple of phone lines free. I don't know why. I don't know whether have you in one of those moods? Have you been to answering the phones and telling people to sling their hooks? Or no, it was full 2 seconds ago, but now we've got 3 phone lines free. So 0345 6060973 is the number you need if you can answer either of the questions that have already been asked, or if indeed you have a question of your own. Don't text me complaining about not being able to get through every week when I give you these heads ups. When the unexpected, is that the correct use of the plural there? Heads ups? No, heads ups. It's a heads up. The plural of heads up is heads ups. Surely, heads ups. Sounds like it's got a Z in the middle. I like that, heads ups. If I give you all these heads ups on the rare occasions when there are sort of gaps in the switchboard. Nev's in Ealing. Nev, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question.
Yes.
Okay. In old movies and in comics that I might have read when I was a kid, like the Beano or whatever, Wizard and Chips, that was the kind of thing I liked.
Same here, actually. I loved Wizard and Chips. Did I ever have Mustafa Millions in it?
I can't quite remember that. I remember Lord Snooty.
That's the Beano.
That's the Beano, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah, but in those comics and in early movies, prisoners would often be depicted as wearing uniforms with arrows on them.
Yes, they would.
And my question is, if that actually happened in prisons, why did they put the arrows on them?
I think I know that. I think it's actually quite obvious when you think about it.
Well, yeah, okay, I think I might have an idea too.
It's because if they escaped, they'd be quite easily recognisable.
Yes.
Until they managed to nick some clothes.
Yeah, but I wonder if they actually did put arrows on them at any point.
Well, you'd need a very distinctive uniform that everybody wore. But the idea, did they actually have arrows? Did they have, I mean, you've gone for 2 questions now. Which is not to be encouraged. So
so did they ever have arrows on them?
I think they did, but let's do that question then. We'll ignore the ignore my
Why?
answer. No, the one with. So did prisoners ever wear uniforms adorned with arrows?
Yeah.
You're on.
Okay, thank you.
I like it, and it was Whizzer and Chips for Mustafa Millions. Enzie's been in touch to confirm. I loved that one. I don't know why that one stuck in my mind. Thank you, Nev. Prisoners and arrows, hot foods and hot people, and corner shops. It's all there today. Like a brimful of Asher. It's 12:16.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien.
12:18 is the time. How do corner shops make money? And it might sound like a slightly strange question, that, but it wouldn't have been if you'd heard David ask it. Does eating hot or spicy food cool you down when you're very hot in hot climates? And why, or did prisoners' uniforms ever feature arrows? All of those and more to come. Sarah is in Stowmarket. Sarah, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on, Sarah.
When I watch intricate operations on the telly.
When you watch what on the telly?
Intricate operations.
Intricate operations? How often do you watch intricate operations on the telly?
Not a lot, but when I do,
yes.
When they make the incision with the scalpel, why doesn't it bleed a lot?
Are we talking about living people?
Yeah, living people. But I sometimes watch those. I don't know. I can't remember what they're called. Intricate operations. Anyway.
Yeah.
And when they.
But what is the difference? I mean, by intricate, I mean, surely any old operation involves a scalpel.
Okay.
Right.
Well, any operation, but when they cut into the skin with the scalpel,
yeah,
it never seems to bleed.
Yeah. I mean, are you sure about this?
Yes. I watched one the other day, and a poor bloke was having his back ripped apart with the scalpel. And, I mean, if I cut myself, it bleeds.
Well, probably, yeah, but if you prick yourself, it bleeds.
Yeah.
But if you cut yourself, it probably, yeah, you're right. If you cut yourself chopping tomatoes or something like that, there's blood all over the place.
Exactly.
Well, don't say exactly like that, because I'm still not accepting your premise that it doesn't happen on intricate operations on the television.
Well, perhaps there is a surgeon listening to your programme.
Well, yeah, and I suppose either we can confirm the fundamental premise of your question, and then we can, if it is true, then we can answer it. But normally you jog my memory with something like that, and I can't. I thought you were talking about post-mortems you see on the television.
No. I think I would know that wouldn't be.
Yeah, right. That's why I thought it'd be easier to answer. I said, but no, I don't know. All right, you're on. So apparently, when you watch an intricate operation on the television, the scalpel, the incision is made, and there is not the amount of blood that we might otherwise expect. And actually quite a lot of support coming in for Sarah's claim. So probably the claim is correct. So what is the answer to the question? 12:21 is the time. Colin is in Ruislip. Colin, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
Royalty.
Yes.
That are in the public eye, like you had the Queen Mother died.
She did.
The Queen passed over, Prince Philip.
Yes.
Now, they had a wardrobe of clothes, phenomenal.
Yeah.
But where do they go? Because if you've got a relative that passed away, you normally bag up their bits and bobs and take them to a charity shop.
You do.
But what happens to the amount of handbags, coats, shoes that the Queen had? Where do they all go? There must have been hundreds of them.
That's a very interesting question. What have you got your eye on? What are you looking out for?
Nothing. I'm on holiday this week, and I'm having to wait till I'm on holiday before I can answer the question. And I've been going in my mind forever. But you never ever see the Queen wear the same outfit maybe more than twice.
You did? No, that's not true. That she was the original outfit repeater.
All right. But
so Daily Mail had entire crack teams dedicated to pointing out that she last wore this dress in 1974. The Queen was an well, I say the Queen. I mean, she's got, ladies in waiting, wardrobe mistresses, got servants coming out of her ears.
Well, that's what I mean. So where did all the clothes go?
After she passed away.
Queen Mother and Prince Philip as well.
Well, sometimes these things end up in the Albert, not the Albert Hall. What am I thinking? The Albert and Victoria Museum, don't they?
The thing that made me ask this question was that the King now was recycling some curtains from old palaces into other things, wasn't he? Do you remember that?
The King was recycling old curtains into what sort of what, trousers?
Cushion covers and things like that as he replaced them.
That's not. I quite like that, actually.
And it made me wonder what happened to all the clothes.
Well, I mean, I know she gave some to her servants. I remember doing something on that when I was a gossip columnist 20-odd years ago. That was not unheard of for dressers to get some of the clothes. But you're talking about after she passed,
Yes.
what happened to her capacious wardrobe? It's a good question, that, mate.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, well done. It was worth taking a holiday for that, I think.
It was, just indeed.
Just for that. Cheers, Colin. I don't know who'd know the answer to that, and if people did know the answer to it, they might not be allowed to ring me. But there it is. What happened to the late Queen or the late Queen Mother's fairly large wardrobes? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. This is true from Mike. You might not think it, but it is. Queen Victoria's underwear often comes up for auction. I can't remember why that is, but there was a story not long ago about why that was actually a thing. Bob's in Tavistock. Bob, question or answer?
It's a question for you, James.
Carry on, Bob.
Okay, and it's regarding electric toothbrushes.
Oh yeah,
and how they charge.
Bloody don't.
Well, I have an electric toothbrush,
yes.
And in order to charge it,
yes,
it sits on a little plastic pedestal. But as far as I can see,
it's more of a nipple. It's more of a nipple than a pedestal.
Well, I was going to say nipple, but I wasn't sure whether you dump.
I can't dump you. I can't dump you for saying nipple, Bob. What do you think this is? It's a perfectly reasonable because a pedestal for me is a flat surface even.
That's as may be, but like, say for example, if you wanted to charge a car battery up, in order for the electrons to flow, you need good contacts, don't you?
You do.
Whereas a toothbrush sits on a little plastic thing, and as far as I can see, there's no
a little plastic.
Exactly, a little plastic nipple, and there's no metal contact. So how does it charge? How do the electrons end up? Flowing?
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
Go on. The bad news.
The bad news is that I think have had this question before, but the good news is that I know the answer. That's just that it's only from having done it before that I know the answer. It's not from particular. Why do you sound so disappointed?
I'm not. I'm waiting to be enlightened.
Okay, stand by. It is magnets. It's magnetic fields doing the power. So, it's true. Keith is doing strange things with his phone, but you can do the same thing with your phone, can't you? You can put your phone on. I can't see, Keith. You should. I mean, how long have we worked together? These windows are tinted. It's like a wireless charger. It's not unique to toothbrushes. I've got a clock radio, would you believe, next to the bed that I can put my phone on top of, and it charges without me having to plug anything in. But what you've got is. I don't want to say coils, but it is. I think it is coils. One in the nipple, and one in the toothbrush. And when you put them together, it creates one circuit, as it were, and that charges up the battery in your toothbrush. I think it's called inductive charging. Inductive? Not conductive. Inductive. Inductive. It's inductive as opposed to conductive.
Well, every day's a school day.
I hope so. Yeah. Do you have any problems with your charger by any chance?
I don't, because I have a number of toothbrushes.
Do you?
We've had visitors and they leave them behind. And
what, electric toothbrushes?
Yeah.
Really? Don't you phone them up and tell them? They cost quite a lot of money, these toothbrushes.
Well, they do, but I've managed to acquire about 3 of the things.
Aye.
So I kind of leave.
So I've got 2 problems with mine. I've got 2 problems with mine, Bob. The first is I always forget that I've plugged it in. So I've got so many bathrooms in my palace. I'll be running around from bathroom to bathroom, desperately trying to find my electric toothbrush, and then I'll suddenly remember that I've plugged it in under the sofa in the bedroom. And the other problem I've got is it often doesn't work. I'm pretty sure it's worked. The lights seem to be on and it seems to be charging. And I come back the next morning and get ready to brush my teeth and it's flat again.
Do
you never get that at all?
No, I don't. No.
Well, I never. You live and learn. And are you happy with the answer, Bob?
Yeah, you've done exceptionally well.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. I'll take a round of applause, please, Keith.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Qualifications have done it before on Mystery Hour. Mystery Hour is becoming arguably the most referenced source material for Mystery Hour, which I quite like that. I didn't used to like that. I used to get cross about that. I used to ban repetition, but hey, how the world turns. Jill's in Beckenham. Jill, question or answer?
An answer about the convict's arrows.
Oh, thank God you're here. What is it, Jill?
It was a symbol of government property. In the reign of William and Mary, they told the Earl of Romney, whose name Lord Sidney, that he must find a way of identifying government property so that to prevent theft. And his family crest was a downward-facing arrow, broad arrow.
Right.
And so he used that. And all government property was stamped with the downward arrow.
What an amazing answer.
Yeah.
Was that Philip Sidney?
I don't know. I don't know.
It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. So, qualifications? Qualifications
was a couple of years ago, my husband and I were in Warwick, and there's a very lovely medieval building in Warwick called the Lord Leicester Hospital.
Oh, yes.
And on the wall in the hospital is the Sidney family crest.
Right.
And we were being shown round by a guide, and he said that's the origin of the downward arrow on convicts' clothing.
Round of applause for Jill.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jill. I love that one. And look at that. Brought us in bang on time as well. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Isaac is doing that sort of damning with faint praise thing here, but I'll take it. He says, that was a surprisingly good stab at explaining induction, James. Thank you, Isaac. Tim Humphrey is here now with your headlines.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
It is 12:33. We don't really do motoring issues on this programme, but there are a couple of stories around that I thought were quite interesting. Electric car sales rose by 10.8% in August, which was quite a lot. But the really interesting story that I like was the number of children that are now walking and cycling to school as a consequence of an ultra-low emission zone. I don't think it was the London one. It was another one. But it's seen a really exponential increase in the number of children walking and cycling to school. So, down with that sort of thing. Back to Mystery Hour. Questions in need of answers include, how do corner shops make money, given that, the competition has increased? And anyway, does hot stuff cool you down when you're hot in the way that... No, that's not right. Does cold stuff... Oh, anyway, you heard the question. I can't remember the details. We've done the prisons and the arrows. Sarah's convinced that people don't bleed much when surgeons cut them with scalpels. If that's true, why is that true? Where do all the clothes go when senior members of the royal family pass away? And I did the electric toothbrush one myself. Robin is in Manchester. Robin, question or answer?
I have an answer for you, James.
Carry on, Robin.
The bleeding one.
Oh, yes.
Bottom line is all tissues bleed when you cut them.
Oh, exactly.
But some bleed more than others. Hands and fingers, for example, and the scalp have a much bigger blood supply than areas such as the skin on your abdomen or your back. So when you cut into that, those will bleed more, obviously.
So we're literally thinking, Sarah and I, that because our thumb bleeds so much when we cut it chopping onions, then our buttocks would bleed. Our buttocks would bleed just as much if a scalpel were to end up in our buttocks.
Yes, there are also some nuances to it in the fact that we use some blades called diathermy, which actually seal off the blood vessels as they cut through the tissue layers. And in some areas, the surgeons will use local anaesthetic that's infiltrated with adrenaline before they make the cut. So that will cause local constriction of blood vessels and prevent the bleeding when you cut it anyway. So it could be a number of factors: site, instrument used, and preventative measures such as adrenaline before the operation.
Qualifications?
I am a surgeon.
Cool beans. Now, Eleanor thinks that we need another surgeon on, but I think you've now covered so much territory, possibly even more than you covered when you were speaking to her, that we don't. But the thing about surgeons is they're like bloody buses, aren't they? You wait ages for one to come along. And Richard in Stoke-on-Trent, are you also a surgeon?
I am, James, yeah. How are you?
I'm very well. Do you know each other? Or shall I introduce you? Richard, Robin? Richard?
I don't. Morning, Robin.
Hello.
Morning, Richard.
Do you need to add anything to what Robin said, do you feel, Richard?
I think he's stolen my thunder slightly. I think I would agree with everything he said, which is that different parts of the body bleed in different amounts. I think that if maybe your caller was referencing, perhaps if I was to make a large incision on your abdomen, it's surprising that you can cut through the very top layer of the skin and actually have relatively little bleeding. It's if you go deeper into the fat, that's when you get the more serious amounts of bleeding. And so what we tend to do is start to make a very superficial incision in the skin to begin with, which often doesn't bleed that much. And then you use the cautery diathermy device to cut through the fat and get through the deeper layers. So that's generally how it is.
Great work, lads. Seriously, I can't remember the last time I can't remember the last time we had a tag team as effective as this one. That is every I dotted and every T crossed. But I need to pick a winner. So, going from my pronunciation of the word buttocks, what film was I watching last night?
Keep me the bag.
Forrest Gump.
Yay! Who was that? Yes. Who was that? Richard or Robin?
Robin won.
Robin gets a round of applause.
I'll share it with Richard.
That's very gracious of you. Thank you, gentlemen. 12:37 is the time. It's a classic film, by the way. Farzana is in Romford. Farzana, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
I'd like to know if local wildlife birds know the difference in branded foods.
What? First of all, what is this local wildlife birds that you speak of? Do you just mean birds, wild birds?
Just birds, wildlife birds.
Wildlife birds. You say wild birds.
Wildlife
any old
birds.
No, not wildlife birds, just wild birds.
Just any birds.
Birds.
Any birds.
What's wrong with bees?
Nothing wrong with bees. So I'm an amateur bird watcher and I feed my local garden birds. And I know that they absolutely love suet pellets.
Suet pellets.
Yes, and I've recently bought suet pellets from a different store.
Right.
And there's been no action in the last 3 weeks. The pellets look exactly the same colour, same size, but it's just from a different shop. So I just want to know if birds know the difference of brands of food.
Well, it's not. I mean, they're not going to know the brand, are they? But they're going to know the recipe. So, in a way, you've answered your own question, haven't you?
To an extent. I mean, I've not looked at the ingredients or the recipe of these suet pellets, but I can't assume them to be very much different.
Were they the same price?
I might be wrong.
Were they the same price?
Very similar in price, yeah.
Okay, that theory has gone out the window. But so you've offered up 2 different varieties of suet pellets, and the birds only go for one of them.
I only go for one of them.
That's the answer to your question. Can they tell the difference? They must. No, they don't know the brand. They don't tweet to each other.
They know the difference.
Yeah, they know. Yeah, they know. Oh, she's got own brand. We only like the premium stuff. They don't know the name of the brand, but the recipes. They must be different recipes.
That could be the answer.
Yeah, it is the answer. They must do qualifications. I know this amateur wildlife bird watcher. And she tried it. She did an experiment in controlled circumstances with 2 different varieties of suet balls. Is that the correct phrase? Suet balls?
Suet pellets.
Suet pellets. And the birds only went for one of them. Have you swapped back yet?
I've not swapped back yet.
Well, that will be the control on your experiment, wouldn't it? Once you swap back, if the birds come back, then you've got your answer. But there must be slightly different recipes.
But it must be. It's just that there's a lot of types of birds that come and love the suet pellets. So I'm just thinking,
but not the new suet pellets.
Not this new
literally
suet pellets.
no action at all. Not a dicky bird.
Nothing whatsoever. They go for the mixed seeds now rather than the suet pellets.
And were the mixed seeds there when the old suet pellets were there?
Yeah, absolutely. And always the suet pellets would get finished much, much faster, and then they'd come back for the mixed seeds later on. It's not happening.
I'll put it on the board.
Okay.
But don't forget that birds are notoriously pecky eaters.
Yes, they are.
Pecky eaters. That's 2 brilliant. I've done 2 jokes there. I did not a dicky bird, and you didn't even notice. And then I did pecky eaters, and you just agreed with me.
I got the pecky eaters.
All right, but you missed the dicky bird.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Well, I nicked that off Kevin anyway. He sent that in. I passed. And I can recommend a book for you if you like.
Yes, please.
Because Florence, who rang in, I think last week or the week before, Florence Wilkinson, has sent me a copy of her book, Wild City. It's called Encounters with Urban Wildlife. It only arrived this morning, but it is right up your street, I think.
Lovely.
And it is for it's all about the stuff we can find, not just birds, but badgers in Brighton. Bats, mosquitoes that are unique to the London Underground network. There's something in here for everybody. You're going to love it, Farzana. It's called Wild City. Wild City. Put it on your list.
Wild City. Got
right,
it.
Ready? Or Wildlife City, as you would call it. It's
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Farzana. It's 12:41. Tim's at the Cambridge Services. That's very specific, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah. Hello, James. Lovely to talk to you.
Likewise, Tim. What have you got? Question or answer?
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
I had something very weird happen in a mobile phone call with my wife a while ago, and I'd like to find out what it was.
Right.
Basically, we were just talking away, and like after about a few minutes, I kind of thought, she's starting to repeat herself here.
Right.
I said, so, for the first time round, I was, yes, oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Then after a couple of minutes, she was starting to say the same things, and it was, okay, yep, yeah, I know. Yeah, you told me. Yeah, so you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then she said exactly the same thing again and again, and it was like, yes, dear. Yeah, I know. Yes, you told me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you told me. And I was kind of starting to think that she might have lost the plot a bit after about 20 minutes of like this sort of three or 4 minute cycle going over and over and over. In the end, it's like, dear, are you okay? Is everything all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, what's happening? And then I kind of thought, is this something technical? So I sort of established that, she wasn't going to be interrupted in this cycle.
Yeah.
So I just hung up and I phoned her back. And she said, is everything all right? She said, yeah. Why? I said, well, about that phone call we've just had. She said, well, what about it? I said, well, you were kind of repeating yourself a bit. I said, well, what? I was like talking to you for a couple of minutes, and then we just got cut off.
Yeah.
So obviously we were caught in some sort of a loop. So I was listening to the same sort of 3 or 4 minute cycle.
Like a recording of what she... So she hadn't repeated herself at all.
She hadn't repeated herself at all. We just got cut off. But obviously somewhere was stored this conversation.
Ooh, spooky.
And it was just like playing back to me again.
I don't know why you're phoning Mystery Hour. You should have phoned John Sawyer yesterday on Nick's show yesterday, the former head of MI6.
Oh, yours is the only show I listen to, James.
Oh, fair enough. It sounds like it sounds like your phone is being tapped.
Oh dear, I'd hope not.
It sounds like your phone is being tapped. It sounds like your phone is being tapped.
Yeah, oh, very good. So I should have seen that one coming, shouldn't I? So yeah.
I'm not going to say it again. I don't know if it would have been funny for me to say it. So it got recorded and it got played back to you again and again and again and again. Roughly how many times? Roughly 5.
Yeah, half a dozen times.
Yeah, okay.
It was like, basically, it took me from walking, because I was walking through London. I walked from London Bridge to St Paul's along the river.
Yeah, no, that's quite a distance, and it was definitely a repetition. Tim,
yeah,
it sounds like your phone's being tapped.
I hope not.
Well, me too, but we'll find out. It's 1:45.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien.
12:48 is the time. Questions still in need of answers. Nothing on the corner shops, unfortunately, so there's still time. How do corner shops make money? Does eating cold stuff or drinking cold stuff in cold weather warm you up? Is that the right answer? Is that the right question? In the same way that hot stuff in hot weather cools you down. Yeah, got there in the end. Sorry about that. Done that one. Where did the late Queen's clothes go? Or indeed any senior royal? Why do Farzana's birds not eat her suet pellets? I mean, do they know the difference in recipe or brand, or it could be seasonal, could it? And what happened to Tim's phone? Scott's in Penrith. Scott, question or answer?
It's a question, James. I can't believe I'm through to you. I wanted to wanted to ask this question for years.
How many years?
I say years. No, it's probably a year.
Just
probably
one year. Right, go on.
Probably a year. Yeah, but it's being a fellow cheese lover, I'm hoping you might be able to help me out here.
I do like a bit of cheese. I cannot like. Go on. Yeah. What's up?
Have you ever heard of Caerphilly?
Yeah, of course I have. Yeah, it's hard cheese.
It's just disappeared, like everywhere. Every supermarket, practically overnight, stopped selling it. Whether it be all the big ones, Morrison's, Sainsbury's, you just cannot find it anywhere anymore. But it used to be commercially everywhere.
Really?
Oh, I've done the nation. You can't find it in any of the big supermarkets. You can get it in like special cheese shops, and stuff like that, but you cannot find it. Just normal Caerphilly, nothing special, not like a special type of it, but just
like
your
with
regular
apricots in it or something like that. Or,
just regular Caerphilly. It's like Cheshire cheese, quite like Cheshire.
Yeah, it is crumbly, isn't it? It's quite crumbly.
It is, yeah, almost like a chalky cheese, really.
Chalky cheese.
It used to be everywhere, and now
did it? Honestly, I've not tracked this, so it would be like you'd be find it as easily as say a Red Leicester or something like that. It would be in almost every self-respecting cheese aisle would have a Caerphilly in it.
Literally.
And
everywhere.
now you've got to go to specialist suppliers.
Yeah, and I just wanted to know why.
I do now as well.
Yeah, I miss it. It's a pretty good cheese.
You sound quite plaintive there, mate. Can you not get hold of it anywhere? Have you not got a specialist?
Oh, no, I have found it, James. I've done my homework.
Good. Do you get it delivered now? Do you get it on the dark web? You can get it on the dark web, I bet. You what?
It now costs me about £6 just for a little wedge of it now, but it's worth it. It's worth it, James.
I'm trying to think what the answer might be. Is it since Brexit by any chance? Could it have stopped with Brexit?
I think it was a bit after. No, it was after Brexit. But like I always used to
it might have a constituent, an ingredient that has to come in from overseas, and it's made it more expensive to make. I mean, I'm trying to think of theories.
So I used to live near North Wales, which obviously is more readily available that way, being closer to Wales. And just every supermarket did sell it. Even like there was a commercial brand, I think they're called Dragon or something like that. They stopped selling it, and it's like
and it's all gone.
It is literally, you cannot get it in any supermarket at all. And the amount of people that have asked about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, and then they realise
now you come to mention it kind of thing, people are going, you're right, you've got it. And people have got to stop sending me puns based on the word carefully as well, because it's so obvious. I'm not going to make that joke. Nor is Scott. We're far too self-respecting to start making jokes about looking carefully or anything like that.
Oh, that's what. Well,
He has been looking carefully.
I have been.
Yeah, for carefully. I'll find out. Well, I should tell you what. I should stop gassing and get the phone line free. Scott, take care. What's happened to all the carefully? Sam's in Gerrard's Cross. Sam, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's an answer to convenience store survival.
Yeah. Yes. Good man. What have you got?
Well, there are a few mix in the pot. One of the ways they deal with it when the supermarkets run promotions.
Yes.
Like half price or lower price compared to the normal retail price.
Yes.
We buy and stock it, and then release the stock, on a piecemeal or on the normal basis. So
Fair
there
enough.
is a margin.
Yeah. Nice one.
That one way the margin, and also our margins are not high, so it's a basic survival, comparable, reasonably comparable to supermarket prices, but not very high.
So you've got relatively small margins, and it's staying open all hours, to coin a phrase, is really the secret. So some days you're probably going to be earning less than, you're not going to be earning a very good hourly rate, but because you're open all the time, it evens out over the course of the year.
Over the year, yes, you're right. Yeah, spot on.
I like that. Qualifications?
I'm an accountant, and I also used to run an off license and news agent.
Why did you knock it on the head to become an accountant? Better hours.
Why did I?
Right, give it up. Give up the shop to become an accountant. Better hours.
No, I was an accountant before, but I thought, just test the market on the retail sector.
Okay.
I tried it, and it's too much for me, so I came out.
Too much like hard work, Sam.
It is hard work. And
get your feet up. Get a nice office job. Nice white-collar bit of business as an accountant. Much easier. Although, of course, you can't watch the telly all day when you're an accountant like you can when you run a corner shop.
Yeah, I suppose so, but it comes with all the flimsy things as well, isn't it?
This swings and roundabouts. Swings and roundabouts, Sam. Have a round of applause.
Thanks very much, Brad.
Well, you take care.
And can I take a privilege to say hi to the convenience store owners, please?
Well, all of them?
All of them, and specific to the Sri Lankan Tamil community you are running.
You can, but not one by one.
Okay, now just say hi to Sri Lankan Tamils running the convenience stores.
Fantastic. And if I bump into any, I'm at the cricket on Saturday, so if I bump into any, I'll say hello to them as well.
Oh, please do it.
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Sam. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. 12. Actually, I got a friend who's Sri Lankan who runs a convenience store. It runs the Budgeons near where I used to live, actually. So you live and learn. I wonder if Sam knew him. I should have checked. Peter's in Oxford. Peter, question or answer?
I've got an answer, James.
Carry on, Peter.
It's in regards to the question about the suet pellets versus birdseed.
Oh, yeah.
And my theory and belief is that it's not so much about the brand of the suet pellets, but rather the seasonal instincts of the birds. Because birds will naturally change their diet depending on the food that's available in the wild. And things, the flowers that would produce seed and the plants that produce seed, such as, for instance, sunflowers or thistles, that they're now dying off. The seeds are drying out. They're at the stage where the birds are going to be seeking those out naturally. Suet pellets are high in fat, and sometimes they even mix the insects in there and whatnot. And so the suet pellets are usually most satisfying for birds in the winter and the spring when they need the nutrients.
So we should have checked with Farzana of how long a period of time this experiment had been conducted, shouldn't we?
Agree, or it could be the time that things are naturally changing and the birds are.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. If she'd been using them for 2 years and they'd been eaten regularly for 2 years and then it stopped when she changed recipes, then my theory would work. But if she's only been doing it for a relatively short amount of time, then your theory works.
Or maybe it's a longitudinal issue where she needs to do this survey over the course of years and note the date and the season at which
that's
the birds
exactly
may
what she
switch
needs
over.
to do.
So we need more controls in the experiment.
You're not wrong. In fact, it was quite amateurish, really, the experiment that she described.
Well, we all start somewhere, yeah.
We do all start somewhere. Qualifications?
Absolutely none. I'm a avid bird watcher myself.
That's
and
it. That'll do.
Gardener,
That's
and I can see the birds. It's cloudy and rainy today, but normally I can see the sunflowers my wife planted, and the birds are starting to pick at them. So
there you go. I bet you've done it. I'm going to give you a round of applause. I think you might. I think you've nailed it. Go on. Thank you. Paul's in Falkirk, or is Fall in Falkirk? I don't know. Question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Paul.
It's regards to the telephone.
Oh, yeah.
Situation. Yes. What generally tends to happen is I do a lot of overseas calls.
Right.
And this happens on a regular basis when I'm doing overseas calls.
Really?
And what happens is, the network jumps in and they repeat the conversation, and it's to keep you on the phone longer so that you're having to pay for the call more than what you should be.
No, it can't. Don't be serious. It can't be.
That's what happens.
I believe that it happens, but they're not doing it on purpose to prolong the length of the phone call.
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, nor am I. How often? How many overseas phone calls do you make a year, a week, a month?
Several.
So I'm looking for a bit more specifics.
Right. Okay. 100.
100 a year.
No, 100 a month.
100 a month. Is it business then?
Yeah, I work in sales.
And how many times out of that 100 would you get the repetition recording thing going on?
Probably about 5 or 6.
That's quite a lot.
Yep.
But you've got absolutely no basis for your conclusion that this is a profiteering scam being run by the phone company.
This is what we've established.
Who's
as a
we?
Business.
Who's we?
The business that I work for.
Aye. Are your calls being recorded for training purposes?
Oh, of course.
Well, that's what's happened then. Is something wrong with your software?
Nah.
Your calls are being recorded for training purposes.
No, it's happened too many times. And
your calls are being recorded for training purposes.
Nah, we've all discussed it, and
your calls are being recorded for training purposes.
Well, you keep repeating yourself, so that's quite funny.
Of course. You got there in the end, Paul. I'm going to give you a round of applause, mate, but I don't think it can be that. That can't be what happened to whoever it was that rang in with that question. It was Tim, wasn't it? We got 2 Tims today. It can't be what happened to Tim because it only happened once and it was rare. But lovely stuff, Paul. Thank you for playing. I'm going to give it to Farzana, actually, I think, the Mystery Hour board game, because she didn't get a proper answer. Well, she did get an answer to her question. So I'm going to give it to Colin, because we didn't find out about the Queen's clothes. So Colin gets the Mystery Hour board game this week. 12:59 is the time. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4. But now, on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty. 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 LBC.